Welcome to the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. Today's date is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. The Planning Commission consists of residents from each Salt Lake City district that are appointed in a manner providing balanced geographic, professional, neighborhood, and community interest representation. The Planning Commission reviews and acts on any changes to the city's general plans, small area plans, special studies, zoning ordinances, and zoning district maps. The Commission also reviews and acts on planned unit developments, conditional uses, and certain subdivisions. Our goal is to provide a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We ask that those in attendance adhere to a few ground rules. 1, silence or turn off your cell phones. 2, respect the person speaking and do not interrupt or do other things that could intimidate or deter others from exercising their right to be heard. Clapping, cheering, jeering, shouting, or other actions used to discourage people who have different opinions from participating will not be tolerated. People who attempt to diminish someone else's input may be removed from the room. 3, if you wish to speak, come to the microphone once the public hearing has been opened and state your name. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to comment. Your time cannot be combined with someone else's time. Everyone will get the same amount of time to speak so that we can ensure everyone is treated equally. If you are a representative of an officially registered, recognized organization, and the item you wish to speak on is within the boundaries of your organization, you will be given 5 minutes. If it is outside of your boundaries, you will be given 2 minutes. 4, if you have a handout that you want the commission to see, you need to leave copies because they become part of the legal record. 5, when commenting, speak clearly, keep your comments on topic and brief. 6, questions asked during a public hearing will not be answered during the public hearing. Rather, the commission may ask the applicant or staff to answer questions after the public hearing is closed, or ask city staff to follow up with you at a later time. And before we get started, we have had one relatively last-minute change to the agenda. On the regular agenda, item number 2, zoning map amendment at 1463 South and 1467 South Cheyenne Street, case number PLN PCM 2023-00096. The applicant has withdrawn that item, and as it is no longer under consideration, we will not be hearing that item or taking comments. So if you're here for that item, you're welcome to stick around, but we're not going to be taking comment on it since the item has been withdrawn. So we will go ahead and get started with the report of the chair. The chair has nothing to report, and the vice chair is not here this evening. So we will move on to the report of the director.
Nothing on the director's report.
We will go ahead and move to our open forum. If we have any commissioners who have anything that they would like to discuss in open forum, go ahead.
I have something that I want to bring up to planning managers. So as we embark on what I'll just call the great rezone consolidation of 2024, one of the things that struck me the other day is over-the-counter, some over-the-counter stuff, and then also there's some zoning, and Diana actually might be able to help me remember the particulars on this one. But we had an over-the-counter that I was going past on 17 South and West Temple that the West Temple side looks exactly like what we've always wanted to avoid. The side of a building, and then there's a door in the far corner that you can't really see. So we didn't get any kind of engagement, but that was over the counter, and that was something I'd hoped we would address better with moving building permits into zoning, but that one just barely got finished. So I don't know how well we're doing that. There was also a project that we approved on 7th East, south of the freeway, obviously on the east side. Same thing, but we approved it, and the way the door on the side got pushed back so far, and then there's a privacy screen that is so tall it looks just like the side of a building. There's no way that was like that when we approved it. So obviously within the difference in staff like modifying those things and approving that, we missed the mark on that one. And then the one that Diana might be able to help me to remember is the one on Highland Drive south of the freeway in between the Subway and the 7-Eleven. And the side on Highland Drive was just a blank wall, and she worked with the applicant to get a nice sliver of a window that the applicant said was elegant, and I didn't know how to not agree with that in a polite way, so I let it go. But Diana mentioned to me that the zone, that specific zone, had nothing in the design guidelines that would have required any kind of interaction along that major street on Highland Drive. So there wasn't anything we could really do about it. And so those are 3 prime examples that have been in my head lately that I'm hoping we can deal with a little better as you do the rezoning consolidation into the form-based, that we make sure that there's not a zone where that is happening, because the only place I can foresee that being something we wouldn't want to pay attention to is like an industrial area. But everywhere else, we don't want what's on the street to be look like the side of a building because it's a sideways infill. We need to, obviously we still have work to do on that. So I just wanted to bring that up to the planning managers in hopes that you can get that kind of more in the forefront of when you look at writing the form-based code and making sure that we're capturing these things that are not, they're falling through the cracks in 3 different scenarios there.
I can just tell you, my team's actually working on the design standards for the new MU zones, and so I can tell you we are definitely very focused on those street-facing facades, and they will be including requirements for entry features and entries in every one of the form-based zones.
Right. I hope that the entry features aren't just a door slapped on it.
They will not be.
That we have. I mean, that's something that the Planning Commission, since at least the previous iteration, we paid a lot of attention to that, because that's what those all were coming through as, something that is giving it more feature, but also something not like the one on 7th East where they recessed it so much and then have a privacy fencing that basically is a wall. So there's nothing on the street frontage.
Okay. Well, those are all good comments, and we definitely will look at that.
Thank you, guys.
Anything else for our open forum? We will go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. We have 6 items on our consent agenda. Item number 1 is modifications to plan development at approximately 367 West, 1700 South, case number PLN PCM 2021-01241, which will be included in the public hearing. Number 2, conditional use for a bar establishment at 505 South Gale Street, Suite 200, case number PLN PCM 2024-00015, which also will be included in the public hearing. Number 3, modification of a planned development at approximately 750 North Redwood Road, case number PLN PCM 2021-00702, which will also be included in the public hearing. Number 4, design review for the lofts at 13th and 7th at approximately 1330 South, 700 West. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00610, which will also be included in the public hearing. Number 5, extension request for design review and TSA score at approximately 425 East, 400 South. Case numbers PLN PCM 2022-01102 and PLN TSD 2022-01103, which is the one item not included in the public hearing. And there is also the approval of meeting minutes from Wednesday, February 28th, and also approval of meeting minutes from Wednesday, March 13th. So we will go ahead and open up the public hearing on 4 of those items. So if there's anyone who wants to give comment on the consent agenda items, go ahead and approach the microphone. It looks like we don't have anyone giving public comment on those items. Have we received any emails on those items? We will go ahead and close the public hearing on the consent agenda and come back to the commission for a motion on the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I just have a clarifying question. So it is permissible to vote no on any one of the specific consent agenda items and yes on others?
I think the way that we do it is we're making a motion to approve the consent agenda as it stands, or we make a motion to approve the consent agenda but to move certain items off of it. Is that correct procedurally?
Mr. Chair, actually, they can vote no if they don't approve of it.
If they don't approve
Yeah.
of, yes.
So, yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify. So one specific item, I'm free to vote no on,
Okay.
or 2 specific items, or however many I feel. Okay, thank you.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second. We have a motion from Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Kratzik. Any discussion to the motion? We will go ahead and take a vote, and if you were absent from one of the meetings, go ahead and state which meeting you are abstaining from on the minutes approval. Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Consent agenda item number 3, I vote no, and the rest is yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes on all but number 3, which is also no.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes on all items except for the minutes of March
13th.
13th. Thank you. Fair, I was absent.
Commissioner Kratzik.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. That passes unanimously with 2 noes on item 3 and 1 abstention on the March 13th minutes. We will go ahead and move on to our briefings. Our first briefing is 300 West Corridor and Central Point Station Area Plan brief. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00397. And our planners are Daniel Echevera and one other person who's not listed. So if you could state your name, go ahead.
Jessica Garrow. I'm a consultant with Design Workshop.
Thank you.
Okay, while we're getting that set up, so I'll just give the commission a little bit of background and turn it over to Jessica, one of our consultants who's working on this planning effort. So we've been doing public outreach for the area around the 21st South Track Station for about the last 6 months or so. And we're finally at a point where we are drafting up a draft plan document. So we're here to check in with the commission and get your input on the draft concepts, draft framework, and answer any questions you might have so far. So with that, I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Again, Jessica Garrow with Design Workshop. We have been working with MHTN and city staff on work for the 300 West Corridor Plan and the Central Point Station Area Plan. We're really excited to give you an update on progress tonight. This slide illustrates the study area. On the left, you can see the interaction between the ballpark station as well as the Central Point station. And the area in red is really the focus of this small area plan and the corridor plan. So running from 1700 South down to 2100 South at the border with Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake City. As we began work, we were really interested in existing conditions and wanting to make sure we really understood the character of the corridor in the area. And it really is a place that is destination retail in terms of big box, auto-centric development patterns. There's also been a number of improvements to the area, notably the 300 West bike path, as well as some new housing developments providing additional housing opportunities for the community. And so these types of improvements are changing the nature of land uses and development in the area, and so it's a good time to be thinking about what the future might hold. So based off of community engagement, we've identified a project vision statement which identifies the area as one that includes new public spaces, additional green areas and open spaces. This is something we've heard a lot from the community as being important in this area. Incorporating mixed-use development and different housing types. Really importantly, the vision also focuses on maintaining existing businesses and uses. The plan will provide a framework if a property owner decided to move forward with redevelopment. This provides the ingredients for that to be successful, but it does not require anyone to be making improvements at this time. So in terms of the public process, we did begin in June of last year, May through June of last year, with some focus groups. We had some targeted community interviews with businesses and residents of the area, as well as some online survey opportunities through the summer. And then we had an open house here in the fall, as well as an additional online survey. So from all of that, we've created some draft plan principles and framework that we're excited to share with you tonight. To date, this identifies the community engagement that we've completed with our open house interviews, as well as our online surveys. Couple of really important key takeaways related to the community engagement. Strong support for creating green, vibrant, and economically diverse neighborhoods, strong interest in mixed-use development, clear desire for more parks and open space, some goals around addressing safety and elevating the quality of future development, and then just kind of a recognition that the area does provide some current affordable commercial and warehouse space that really should be maintained into the future. So with the community engagement to date, we've identified 4 different project principles. The first is creating a pedestrian-friendly corridor that supports all types of mobility, so really looking at that walkable district. The second is encouraging mixed-use redevelopment, particularly along 300 West and close to the Central Point Station. The third is this idea of a system of both public and private green spaces. So you'll see ideas about how to incorporate that on private development as well as a corridor of greenery around the tracks line. And then finally, incorporating density through different housing opportunities. So the plan proposes some higher building heights and more density in key areas. This is an image of the draft plan, again, kind of the framework of what future development might look like. And we'll go through each of the different character areas here in a moment. But just to orient you, Central Point Station is down here on the lower right. 2100 South and Pedestrian Plaza is proposed along this street to create some additional public space, allow for some vibrant uses. The orange buildings throughout the plan, those are identified as mixed-use development where there would be active ground floor uses and then residential above. There's maybe some potential for fully commercial buildings in the area, but really trying to focus in on residential with commercial in that mixed-use typology. Yellow are buildings that are proposed to be residential, multifamily. And then the purple are our light industrial, office, and commercial uses. And I'll get into some more detail here in a moment. So our first character area is the Central Point TOD, so along 21 South. It creates the highest density development node within the plan, and the proximity to the station area really provides that opportunity for where density would be really appropriate. As I mentioned, commercial uses on that first floor create an active pedestrian area. We are proposing some improved connections, particularly at West Temple and at 300 West. The idea here is that there would be surface parking lots potentially behind buildings, but not facing any of the streets. And where there are opportunities for larger parking structures, that they would be covered with a green roof. This provides a potential street section along 2100 South. Really importantly, this is a UDOT right-of-way, and so when we're thinking about how to create a great pedestrian experience, a place for bicyclists to be as well, we are proposing a fairly significant setback of the buildings themselves so that we have adequate space for good circulation, areas where seating or signage, interesting things could kind of spill into the space to create some interest along that retail space. Mentioned this is an area where there's potentially the most density, so incorporating step backs to the building to make sure that there's not just a wall of development right along the street, but that there are some visual relief as you move through. This is the area along 300 West. We're calling it a mixed use and commercial area. Again, creating a good edge along the street with building step backs and opportunities for ground floor commercial space that activate the area. We are proposing that the existing bike path move down to the end of the study area to improve that overall circulation. And this again is another street section here, maintaining that bike path and sidewalk, as well as having green buffers, adding some greenery into the area. To create a transition to the established neighborhood along West Temple, we are proposing a step down of height along that tracks line. So here you would see no more than 5-story buildings stepping down, and then adjacent to the existing neighborhoods, lower 3-story buildings that could accommodate townhome style development. We're creating a linear green space with a trail along the tracks line and new green space amenities for residents. So this is a section of the potential trail along the tracks line. Really important way to create green space, because in this part of the city, there's not really any city-owned land for us to use when we think about having parks. And so using what we have here along the tracks line and then encouraging incorporation and private development. The area around 1700 South also provides an opportunity for mixed commercial and residential uses. Some new fully residential buildings are incorporated here, again with that step down towards the existing neighborhood, and then mixed use, particularly at the corner with some higher heights and density at 1700 South and 300 West. A new creative industrial office and commercial area is proposed adjacent to the highway. It provides an opportunity for these types of businesses to remain and potentially expand into the future. Really importantly, you can see here we have some of the existing big box retailers still shown. Again, with this idea of we're not trying to kick anyone out, this is just creating a framework. And so also included in the plan is if one of these businesses did decide to leave the area, this is what it might look like in terms of having some smaller buildings that are still that industrial office type, as well as incorporating mixed use. So just trying to be really flexible with what might happen here. And then finally, this is that existing area of low-scale residential that we're looking to preserve. There may be some opportunities to incorporate other housing types such as ADUs or potential conversion to duplex in the future here, but really trying to maintain that existing scale. This is a map identifying some of the circulation and connection opportunities. This is a really key part of the plan, is trying to create improved pedestrian connections, particularly from the track station across 2100 South into the study area, and then also from 1700 South into the area. There's been a lot of discussion about the potential and interest from the community in the engagement of maybe a new stop here at 17 South, and so that might be something that is incorporated as we move forward. And this idea of new east-west connections to help provide an easier way for people to get between West Temple and into the 300 West corridor. And then finally, we've heard a lot, as I've said, about open space, and so incorporating streetscape improvements in the entire area, and then trying to identify opportunities and maybe incentives for private landowners to incorporate public open spaces in their development. We do have ongoing engagement right now on the principles and ideas that we've just shared, linked to the survey and story map, and these are available on the city's website. And with that, we'll pause and see if you have any questions. We had 3 questions, if it's helpful to help spur conversation, but happy to answer anything you might have.
Go ahead and read those 3 questions for us so that we can start thinking.
Absolutely. And so the first one is about streetscape improvements. So streetscape improvements are proposed in all major streets, particularly along 300 West. And wondering, do you have any thoughts related to those streetscape improvements? Anything you want to make sure is included or not as we move forward? The second is related to heights and density. And so there were some figures on all the slides I went through. So some of the character areas do propose additional density with increased heights. Any concerns with the heights seen tonight? And then third is about the green space. So the potential policy incentives are being considered for encouraging private developers to incorporate public green spaces as part of their mixed-use projects. Do you have any thoughts related to that idea?
Thank you.
I'm going to say that one of the biggest points that I was looking at when I read this, that I think is probably one of the most important to this aspect, is that those pedestrian crossings along 21st South, namely number 1, the one at tracks. Right, we know people are just jaywalking because they're not going to go down. But also, if you cross at the light at 3rd West, it's not very nice either. So anything we can do to improve those is great. But if we're looking at the most important one, it's going to be the one at the tracks line, and especially as you connect it to the linear park. So we have a successful example of a linear park along the Greenway on the S line. And so I think we can definitely work to utilize that same concept along there. But that's the number one thing is we already have some density that was built near there. And until we get those, I think providing incentives for this density is a double-edged sword because we're not providing them safe and hospitable ways to access that transit that we're giving incentives to the developers to build there because it's a TOD, but we're not giving good connections to it. And I think I'm along 300 West a few times a week and I'm a little further north, but I would say that, those making sure those streetscape improvements that happened between 13th and 17th are, fully extended down to 21st South. They're mostly there, but I think that's the biggest continuity that we should focus on because they seem to be very nice. We'll wait till the trees grow, but I don't have anything more specific than those streetscape improvements that we've already seen. But I really would just say the number one thing to me on this is how we're going to cross that and partner with UDOT and South Salt Lake to make that one happen. Because it's currently very unsafe what's going on.
I'm going to jump in and say amen to everything that Commissioner Berry said. And I, in a way, wish that that we could be planning both sides of 21st South together. I have seen that South Salt Lake has now launched their side of it, but I'm hoping that we can make sure that everything is coordinated. Yeah. And because my general the inputs that or the comment that I want to give mainly has to do with the South Salt Lake side. So I want to make sure that those pedestrian crossings on 21st South are all coordinated. And although this is a South Salt Lake issue, but I wish that the road diet and bike lanes on Main Street continued south into South Salt Lake. So if there's any way that you can strenuously pass that on to them, I would appreciate it. But I'm also very happy to see a future track station at 1700 South in the works.
So I have a number of questions and concerns. Thank you for your presentation. Very succinct. It was good. So I'm a person who uses Home Depot and all those guys a lot. Where do those uses go when they're out of there?
So I would say we are not proposing that they leave.
I know you're not,
Yeah.
but the plan calls for them to leave. So if we want them, I mean, I understand we're not asking them to leave, but do we want large-scale retail in Salt Lake City? Where does it go?
I think I emphasize again, so those can coexist in this plan with those higher density residential uses coming in, because I think we're fully acknowledging they have no intention of moving in the next 20 years. So, and I think this
Successful, but I think that's going over my point, which is that if we know they're not going anywhere, why aren't we planning around them?
So I think other communities have run into situations where, for example, a Sam's Club closes when they thought that those were going to be in place for decades. And so it's a surprise, there's no plan in place for a replacement, and it might sit there, or you get industrial use potentially, which it's currently zoned for.
Okay, but my question still remains, where are they going to go in Salt Lake City? Or are we just saying Salt Lake City's just done with that kind of retail?
And I don't think we're saying that those should go away and those shouldn't be in the city where they actually provide services to residents nearby. So
Not to
I
mention
think
tax base.
completely.
So do we have any idea what the tax base of this area currently is?
It was about 10% of the city's sales taxes from these.
From this area
from
alone?
this area
Okay.
alone.
And we're willing to give that up for this plan? I mean, do we have any idea how much taxes are going to be, if we were able to change the uses tomorrow and everything was all what you planned, all your nice pictures, do we have any idea how that would change the amount of money coming into the city?
We haven't run those numbers, and we also, as part of this, I think, recognize that there might be scenarios where we get large retailers, but mixed in with residential components as well.
So why haven't we planned? In other words, I guess what I'm saying is we're planning for small-scale retail all over this place. That's what we're planning for. Small-scale retail is, as we know, kind of difficult, doesn't work in a lot of places, needs parking in order, at this point in our lives, you know, in the next 15 years anyway. So it seems like we're putting together a plan that is very way down the road. We can do this, and we don't have any idea what the impact is on our taxes, on the ability for regular citizens to buy, you know, a wrench, you know. So it just seems like this plan is very similar to a lot of other plans that are coming out in urban design around the country, and it doesn't really address some of these larger issues that have particularly to do with this kind of area in Salt Lake City, rather than, okay, here's our regular 3-story, 4-story, 5-story, 6-story, 7-story pedestrian-oriented plan. So I'm just, I would just like that to be considered, as that this is, I would like to see more specificity about this particular area and the impact that this plan might have on our tax base, which I don't think is actually, I mean, a lot of people think that places like, you know, some of these larger retail, which I'm not going to name, generate a lot, but also they cost a lot too, services from the city. Yeah. But so that's one thing I think that ought to be part of the consideration, that much more specificity. I'm concerned about designating 300 West as the area which you turn all of the buildings to, rather than a narrower streets that go east-west. Because I do think that 300 West is a pretty big street, even after it's been beautifully, by the way, redesigned, and it's lovely. It's great to have the bike lanes. It's great to have the trees. I just wondered if you've considered at all, you know, kind of leaving that without, because it's not going to be scaled right with a 4 or 5-story building. It's just not. It's going to be too broad, and you know, we unless you actually put tracks down the middle of it, which isn't going to happen because tracks is only a block away. I mean, 4 South works because it does have tracks down the middle. It sort of scales it right. But with these larger, wider streets, that scale, urban design-wise, is not going to be nice. It's not going to have that elegance that we want. So it never is. Our streets this is even wider than our regular streets, so it's kind of, I think that's something that should be considered. Also, in terms of the density, the additional density, I don't have a problem in general with additional density or increased heights. What my problem is that if we are going to provide incentives and bonuses for green space, that's where we provide it. You know, we give additional density, we give additional height. Yep. So if we give it to them without any other sort of incentive, then we've given up that potential of that incentive. It's fine balance, obviously, because not everyone's going to want to build a taller building, but they like you said, in the future, Sam's Club goes away, you know, they might. And in that case, you do have the incentive. I would also urge you to make the open space that you make that you incentivize is always publicly accessible. This is one sort of thing we've had a lot of trouble with. Not trouble, but it's just a policy that I think needs better consideration in the city. We need to make these places, a rooftop garden that's only open to the people who live there is not really a public open space. In the first place, it's not really an open space because it's paved. And in the second place, not being open to the public means it's really not accessible to the whole neighborhood or anything like it. That's it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So one of my questions is, so this provides the framework by which people are able to invest into the neighborhood. What do you know from similar development strategies what the time frame is looking like for this whole area to become the envisioned plan? 30-year time frame of like a lot of people investing? Do you have a ballpark on that?
So I would say typically these plans are 20 to 50-year horizons, which is why they show an option of what it might look like if some of these big box retailers left, because in 10 years, we don't think that that's really realistic, but in 50, maybe it is, right? And so trying to think through that. It's also why it shows some different types of connections, east-west, knowing that that will take some time and development occurring over time.
Cool. I think a lot of it looks really great, so thank you.
Well, if we don't have any other input that people want to give, we will go ahead and move on to the next item. Thank you guys for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing it presented when it's formalized.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Our next item, is number 2 on briefings, is amendments to standards for design review 21A.59.050, which is case number PLN PCM 2024-00294, and Amanda Roman is our planner.
Hello.
Mr. Chair, while she's setting up, I just know some people came in a little bit late, so I just wanted everyone to know if you're here for the Cheyenne Street rezone, that the application was withdrawn and there will not be a hearing held today.
Okay, I think I'm ready. This will be a little bit longer, so bear with me. All right, so I am here to present a briefing. What? It's on here. Oh, it wasn't showing on the main screen. Oh, this button. There we go. Thank you. Okay. I am presenting a briefing that will amend our standards for design review at the request of the Planning Commission. So the standards are under 21A 59050. In the petition initiation, the Commission specifically asked planning staff to delete standard D2 because the standard doesn't necessarily result in good design, and it does result in buildings that tend to be over-articulated. The standard states modulate the design of a larger building with using a series of vertical or horizontal emphasis to equate with the scale of the buildings in the context and reduce the visual height width, or height. So the purpose and the goals of the amendment is planning staff would like to amend the language throughout this section of code for clarity, ensure the language meets the intent of the standard, and delete standards that are already addressed elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, such as landscaping or parking. We aim to reduce subjectivity within the design review process and establish a consistent review framework for planning staff. It has been inconsistent at times, knowing when to apply what standard for what application. And then we'd also aim to provide clear expectations from the applicants through this process. Here's a quick slide. So the Planning Commission design review originates from one of the 5 requirements. So if mostly you see projects going under design review because they didn't get enough points in the TSA zoning district, or because they're the applicant is requesting to modify a base zoning requirement under 21A37, which is our base chapter for our design standards. And then I also put the numbers of how many design reviews we've had in the past few years. Okay, so for applicability, moving forward, and we are proposing that all projects undergoing this process would have to meet all of the standards in the design reviews section of code, unless they're requesting additional building length or additional building height, and then they would have to meet the standards on top of the rest of the standards A, B, C, and D. The 3 standards I'm going to touch on today are Standard D, building massing, Standard E, which speaks to building facade, street-facing building facade length, and Standard G, which is for additional building height. The rest of the modifications are smaller, and there's no proposed changes to the purpose or sections A, C, or I, and then we are recommending deleting the signage standards in general. We already have a sign chapter. Typically, applicants don't submit sign plans with design review, and we review them during the building permit process. So we're going to delete the standards and have them meet that during that building review. So Standard D, building massing. The intention of the standard is to reduce the visual massing of buildings and relate them to the human scale. The massing and scale of the structures should be proportionate and compatible with existing buildings in the vicinity, or reflect what is proposed in the general plan for the area. So moving forward, staff is proposing that every building going through the design review process must address the standards under D, regardless of the requested modifications. We are also proposing, as requested by the Planning Commission, to delete the current standard D2, which is on the screen. And then the rest of the amendments to this section of code are just to clarify the existing standards, and we're proposing to move one of the human scaled standards from the additional building height section of code to the massing section. And that was just because all buildings should be human scale, all massing should be appropriate regardless of if you have additional building height or not. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through examples of each standard with some buildings and just touch on different types of buildings, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So the examples on this slide are of massing with both the vertical and horizontal emphasis and material changes. In both of these cases, the design standard was met. The projects were approved by the Planning Commission. Based on feedback, it might be considered that these buildings could be over-articulated regardless of them meeting the standard. So that's just something to consider. And I just want to say up front that I didn't take all these pictures, so I did take them from other sources. This next slide are examples of massing that is appropriate and has been achieved under the standard in staff's opinion. So the white building on the left is across from Pioneer Park. The massing is compatible with the historic structure next door. The banding above the door is aligned, as well as the cornice on top. Both structures have a defined base, middle, and top. When reviewing different buildings throughout the city, this is an example that came up of appropriate massing to be compatible with what's existing in the context of the site. Below that, the brick building is the Dixon Apartments and Sugar House. They have a clearly defined 2-story glass base with the apartments step back from the base. So you have a retail component and then you have housing component. The windows have traditional proportions and the building materials are differentiated but not overly busy. And then finally, the building on the right also has clearly defined massing with a defined base and a transitional vertical element in the middle that separates the two main masses. And just like the other two examples, they also have a very transparent ground floor, although the windows are covered. But the second standard is review of standard E, which this standard will only apply to buildings where additional building length is being requested. The standard as it is written now, the additional building, it's a additional building length above 200 feet. We're proposing to change it to additional building length as required in 21A37. We have some zoning districts like D1 where the max building length is 150 feet. So just relate it back to the chapter where everything is combined. So we're proposing to remove the requirement for material changes to help with the busy facades. And then we do want to specify that the active ground floor uses include residential dwelling units. And then in addition to that, we want to give the commission discretion on whether a proposed use outside of those listed in the standard meets the intent of the standard. We do that instead of putting a list of prohibited uses such as mail rooms or back of house functions. And this is intended to go along with the form-based zoning. Not every street-facing facade can be 100% active. We need to consider smaller side streets. Chicago Street would be a good example. The same treatment doesn't apply. So the discretion will hopefully let the commission look at buildings more individually and not just as a percentage, so we can address different streets and different intensities. Okay, so here's an example. These are the Ice House apartment buildings that were approved. They're in the TSA zone. The building length is 377 feet, and then I have the other requested modifications. The staff review of this project states that the building provides adequate changes in vertical plane, material and massing, which are the standards for buildings with facades over 200 feet. While the building itself is only 88 feet in height, the structure is still very long and presents as very large from the public right-of-way. This is kind of an example that while buildings in this hardware district are very large, this project has expanded that scale. And while it does meet code and it does meet the design review standards, there are some instances where regardless of the design, regardless of the material, the durable materials being used, the building is still quite large. And so we are hoping to amend these standards and consider that moving forward. Here's a building right across the street from us, The Exchange. They went through the design review process for additional building length, 277 feet along 400 south and about 200 along 300 east. They do have other requested modifications. So in the staff approval, the approval explains that the building length was mitigated and the building met the design standards by utilizing variations in colors, materials. This building has recessed windows, which I think we need to take a good look at. It really helps the facade of these long structures not be so flat. And then projecting balconies on some of the facades to help visually break up the overall massing. And then the photo on the bottom right is a photo of the elevation on top, and that's the building just right next door. We believe they did a good job at reducing the perceived length of the building by curving the facade, having multiple different step backs and whatnot. So I went to take a picture of that this morning, and I actually didn't realize how long it was until I walked up there. But the modulation does a good job at reducing the perceived scale of that structure. And I think with the facade length, it really leads us to, I have a few questions, but these examples lead to how long is too long, even with the design review process. Do we allow buildings that are the entire length of our very long blocks, or do we put an actual cap on it, a maximum even with design review approval? So I think that's something to consider, especially because so many projects come through requesting additional building length, and they are more often than not approved. And so that's just something to consider as we move forward. And then standard G. So this is for additional building height as allowed through the individual zoning districts. These standards would only apply to buildings going through the design review process for additional building height, and then they'd also have to meet the rest of the standards. Proposed modifications, this section has the most modifications. So we're proposing to relocate the massing standards, the human scale section of this section, to section D for massing. And then we're proposing to either delete or really take a look at the cornices and roof lines section, as the application has resulted in buildings with some busy roof lines, which I'll show you next. And then we're also proposing to delete the green roof and deck. It's still encouraged by staff. That being said, it can't be practically met by all projects, and the applicability has been inconsistent. And so if we did want to take a look at that, that's great if we wanted to move it or use it as an option moving forward, but saying it's a requirement is a really hard requirement for every project to meet. So here are some examples of different buildings that have been approved through the design review process. Let's see, sorry. Okay, so the top building on Jefferson Street, it was in the CG zone, so we all understand the standards under the CG zone are minimal. Staff determined that the building is well modulated and it uses materials and protruding or inset surfaces to create distinct visual and horizontal elements. And then the project on the bottom was also approved for additional building height along with other modifications. You can see that the structure also uses vertical and horizontal articulation, a different roof line, secondary architectural features, and multiple building materials. While it does meet the standards of the review process, the facade might be considered over-articulated based on discussions. And then here are two buildings in the downtown districts that went through the design review process for additional height, and that is it. No other modifications were requested. Staff approval explains that the additional building height was addressed through large step backs. Both of those step backs are against mid-block walkways that were required. Active ground floors, and usable rooftop spaces. There's a distinction between the base, middle, and top, and design features such as lighting that provide cohesive and complementary roof line. And then just a quick note, the project on the bottom, the Astor, would be approved by right with the new downtown building height regulations because it's less than 200 feet. It did go through the design review process though. And then this leads me to the roof lines and cornices standard that at this time is being proposed to be deleted. This standard's been very difficult for staff to review, and has resulted in a lot of the buildings having similar roof lines, or like the Salt Lake City hat that we talk about. The intent of the standard is to have a roof line that's cohesive to a building's overall form and scale. It should just be a termination point that should reduce the overall height of the building, especially when they're taller. So the language we're proposing to delete is included on this, and then I also put some renderings of proposed buildings that have been approved, existing buildings, just to show that the roof line can be different and it can be complementary to the overall structure. I have some specific discussion items and then the list of questions that staff has in the staff report. the two things we would like guidance on. So under the street-facing facade length, right now we have standards for step backs. We did address step backs in 21A37 with the downtown building heights ordinance. That being said, there's a little bit of confusion on how to apply them. We want to make sure that everything is consistent. So we'd love to get some feedback on at what point, of a building facade length is a step back appropriate, and does this achieve what we'd like for buildings over 100, 200 feet? And then standard that speaks to the base of the building being equal to the width of the right-of-way. That's not, we don't apply it as that, right? Our right-of-ways are massive, so we'd have incredibly large buildings with incredibly large bases if we made every project meet this standard, which we don't currently do. And then building height. And so the way that staff is currently proposing the ordinance, like I said, we've moved massing references to the massing section and then deleted the cornices and roof lines and the green roof. And the section as proposed is only speaking to negative impacts associated with an increase in building height. And so we're wondering, is that enough, or do we want to have more standards when a project goes through for additional building height? Thank you. And then, all I'll say next is after the briefing, I'll take your notes. I will speak to everyone in planning, work on the ordinance, and then we'll start the public engagement process and come back to you guys with a more refined draft to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it our turn? My turn? I wonder where there's commission discretion to decide if ground floor uses are active, if they count towards the active uses. Would that be done with each project at the time of design review, the time that we're considering the whole project? That's when we would say a gym counts, but a mailroom doesn't count, or something like that. Is that when that decision would be made for each separate project?
So on that section of code, we do have that list of active ground floor uses that was modified during the downtown building heights ordinance amendment, and I added the residential dwelling units because there was confusion between the difference of that and residential uses. Like, is a gym a residential use? A mailroom's technically a residential use. So we still have those defined active uses, but I didn't put the prohibited uses, and that's just to give you guys some more discretion depending on the type of project, its location. But it would be, you would make that decision here unless we have some guidelines, for staff as we start that review process.
At the same time, we consider the entire design review. That decision is
as
made.
it's written now, yes.
Maybe it would be good to talk about like what we think you should encourage or discourage when you're looking at projects before they get to that design review point. Because there are things that we always hate to see, like, I don't know, a dog wash. I don't know. Maybe that one's fine. But maybe we can talk more about which one, what we would like to maybe point you in the direction of encouraging or not.
Okay.
I would love to talk about a maximum length for buildings, because we do see a lot of things that are going over 200, or maybe in the downtown area it's 150 feet. We see those a lot, and sometimes they're like twice as long, or
They are.
really a lot. So I'd love to talk about a maximum length. When you're, we had a discussion a while back where we were talking about if like a parapet wall for a roof deck was part of the height of the building. Is that addressed in this?
It's not addressed in this. So parapet wall, you can have 5 feet of parapet wall to screen mechanical equipment.
Yeah.
But overall,
Maybe that was do you guys remember that discussion where we like granted additional 5 feet or something to a building so they could have a roof deck?
Commissioner
I
Burrows, if I
believe
could,
under that.
Sorry, if I could just interrupt. We are working on that as a separate text amendment.
Okay.
We're looking at all the encroachment tables. And so that would include parapet walls and things like that to kind of solve the issue that you brought up.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
In that regard, though, I think, and this sort of attends to this too, why don't we just do stories instead of a particular height? Because if people wanted to build taller, then floor to ceiling height would be better, bigger, taller, which is better for everything, air, light, you name it. And then if they, plus whatever for the top of the building. I mean, it seems like that would solve some issues that we are always having with people saying, I can't build a taller ground floor, which would be nicer, a 3 foot taller, because that would put me over the 60 whatever foot height limit, and then, I lose a whole floor because of that.
Right, and I think that's not a bad way to look at it. Some of our zones, like the form-based zones, they do both. Like you can have up to 30 feet, 2.5 stories, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine as we're working on these new form-based zones, that's something we could consider. So.
Just stories, because people are going to build the minimum stories unless they don't, which would be great,
To continue on that question, our ordinance did used to have more references to stories, and we got away from that and tried to implement harder numbers for elevations because it was easier to administer. The definition of story often became murky, so that became difficult.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, when we do look at stories, there's a lot of question on, is it to the ceiling? Does it include the building material, the building materials and the framing of the building, or just how to measure it is always a question. So.
Well, that's part of the measurement problem too. I mean, it's, but if you, like I say, there's an incentive if you go with stories to be able to have higher ceilings in all of the stories, and therefore you would then, and which is, like I said, better, period. I'd much rather have a 5-story building that's 70 feet tall than squeeze, a 5-story building into the 65-foot minimum. That's a separate issue, not related to this. Thank you very much for this, by the way.
Yes. Before we move forward, does anyone have an extra pen? Mine's not working and I want to take notes. Can I steal it? I'll probably get hit. Thanks. Okay. Onward.
Commissioner Burrows, can I ask you just to speak closer to your microphone? Thank you.
So I'd like to pipe in on the facade length because that's kind of one of my buttons. I would like to entertain the thought of doing a maximum of 50 feet over what is allowed. So 200 to 250, 150 to 200. Anything longer than that is super excessive. I think one of the challenges with the increased facade length is trying to interpret the design and the intent of why we have it. And so I don't think that the current language was ever able to capture that in a meaningful way for us. But one of the things that I've liked when I've tried to interpret the intent was the modulation on the streetscape, and we still didn't seem to really address that. So if we looked at that 4 South project, where the Office Depot is right now, that one had some really interesting modulations where if you were walking, some of the building was a little bit more recessed than other parts of it, because what I think that does for a pedestrian, aka the intent of breaking this up, is feeling like you have different sections of a building. And if you're walking on the street, who cares what color it is down there? Who cares if it's a different material? Because you can't tell that. You can tell it if you're across the street, but what you can tell is on how you're relating to the building. And if there is some better modulation in how it fronts out onto the street or the sidewalk, then it actually will feel like different buildings. That is a key point that we do not have in the ordinance that, or in this design review, that I think would be extremely helpful. For me, I would really like to see language that helps us capture the intent of why we need this more than what we have. I think that's, and so when we talk about this like residential use, I think we also missed the mark because what's happening is we have mixed uses where the entire ground floor is a residential use. It's a gym, it's a mailroom, it's a bike storage, it's the lobby.
Right.
There's nothing that is public. There's no retail, there's no, I mean, so it's not that I'm always against having it, it's that we count that as the ground floor retail, and that's what I want to get away from. Because I know you need a mail room and you need a lobby, but to count those private residential uses as a public amenity is where we really got off track. And so perhaps understanding that we will have residential components along the ground floor, that maybe we look at, a guideline of a percentage. Percentage of this can really be counted towards this, but you still need to have something. We just had one I don't remember when, within the last 2 meetings, where there was a small section on like a corner that was office, but it was like 1,500 square feet.
Yeah.
So what kind of office is that? The rest of it, mailroom, lobby.
That's
That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. It's not trying to highlight that, well, of course you need to understand we'll have residential uses. I think we get that. But that proportion of breakdown is a real problem.
Yes, and staff agrees with that. I think, so with the proposed language, originally it says 80% of the ground floor must be active. That kind of conflicts with some of the new design standards that require more. And so we changed it to ground floors need to comply with the underlying zoning requirements. And then if you don't have an active ground floor use requirement, which some zones don't, then you need to provide 80% if you're asking for additional building length. Just to capture those zones where we don't have required percentages. And to touch on your point with the residential uses, I try to fix that by saying dwelling units instead of uses, since there's a difference between an actual unit and a lobby. But the lobby conversation, the common room, we could go and we could discuss it all day. And I think moving forward, it is defining, is it really a publicly accessible space that the public can use? Is there a percentage that's appropriate? Since buildings need lobbies and, but they don't necessarily need 100
Sure,
feet.
they need a lobby. I would not consider a lobby a public use.
Right, and I agree with that.
For residential dwellings, though, so in the past we've taken this. There are certain design guidelines or certain ordinances that allow for this percentage to be met through what we call live-work units, which never work. They're not live-work, and I have a handful of those in my neighborhood. Their curtains are always drawn, like they're not. So if we do that, and I'm not necessarily opposed to having residential dwellings on the ground floor, but I don't think we should be utilizing the same language to saying this could be an active live unit, because that's just not reality. That's not how they play out. That's where they live. They have their curtains drawn all the time for privacy. Yep. There's no interaction. So I think we just need to be realistic and careful about how we promote dwelling units on the ground floor as we look at that combo of residential dwellings to public spaces.
I think the leasing office also maybe shouldn't count as a public space. No, we don't like leasing offices for public space.
That's part of the conversation, leasing offices and lobbies.
So if I'm understanding it, leaving it to our discretion would make it so that kind of a lot of these things will be able to be decided when each individual project comes up. So if we decide mailroom in this area of the city shouldn't count, so then we make that decision then, if it's just left to our discretion.
Yeah, so I mean, we kept the uses that are, outright allowed. We could always change it and, I don't know, tie it back to a percentage of the facade that they could go with an active use, or maybe something that we can keep looking at that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
This one's a
Yeah,
hard
I think
one
we
to-
all
hard one
want
to
like
get.
a little more something here. So yeah, I mean, this is just part of the conversation. So
Yeah.
I think.
I think that leaving it to our discretion at the time of a meeting is not a good plan. And I think that we should think of something else. We can look to the past a little bit for guidance, where you have a residential unit that has, a stair or something, so you're not actually, even if your windows are closed, what our idea here is that as you're walking down the street, you're not bored to tears by a bunch of blank windows and blank openings and, basically, and frankly, we're bored to tears by retail spaces that are not filled too. So that's also an issue. So if we can fill this, if we look to older cities or even our own older fabric, where it doesn't have to be retail. It can be residential, but we want a streetscape that has this level of interest at the pedestrian level. So I don't know the answer to that, but I will weigh in on the maximum length issue. I think, and I don't know if this is what you were speaking about, Commissioner Berry, but I think it's a good idea if we set a maximum length, 330 feet is half of our city block. Okay, that's a maximum. No one ever goes over that for any reason. But it's impractical, I think. One of the reasons that this is so hard to do is that because of elevators, and people want to have an elevator bank that serves the whole length of a big, long building. They don't want to build two separate buildings with a separation between them for lots of reasons, not just elevators, but all kinds of other building services. So if there were a way, and we have done it, we've approved these all over the place, and it's not bad. It's like the one she was talking about on 4th South, where Office Max is now, where there's an inset, a deep inset in the building, and we just say, okay, the inset minimum, you have to do it every whatever feet, 150 feet, and minimum, or whatever we say, whatever is there as the minimum frontage, that inset has to be there, and it has to be X amount deep, and it has to go from the top of the building to the bottom of the building. You cannot have like a little balcony over, the entrance to the garage and stuff like that. I mean, it's got to really be an inset. And we have seen these before where even on the ground level, that inset becomes a little pocket park, a little public space. And that's a good thing too. So you have these intervals where you have, this deep inset in the building so that there is this massing change. That could be a reasonable alternative to just starting a whole new building, which I think is what you'd have to do if you had a length thing.
Correct. Okay, let me start looking at other codes, other cities. See what they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, similarly, I noticed that in how the language changed, you took contiguous out of the facade length, and I think that gives that idea back, and maybe we just have to set that, it has to be a quarter of the length of the facade or half of it or whatever, and how far back it has to step to bring that back in. But I wondered about that because I think that would be a good way to break it up but actually make them separate buildings. A couple other things. I think we need language about height reduction in there. So we have specifically stuff called out for, going higher, but we just had one that came through about reducing the height. And so
Yeah, that was
how
my
we,
project.
yeah. So I think there's probably different standards we want to look at for that. And we just need to figure out what those are. There is some language in there about the solid to void ratios of windows and like matching kind of existing buildings and things like that. I worry a little bit about that for two reasons. One, just because I think it'll be a nightmare to actually like enforce, and it'll conflict with stuff elsewhere in the code where it says we have to have, you know, between 3 feet and 8 feet, there has to be 50% or whatever. So I think it might end up conflicting with that. And then the second reason just being, I don't want, there is something to be said for like tying into if you're next to a kind of historic building, right? Like trying to kind of match scale with that. The one thing that can be a problem with that is that like those like window sizes and widths and spacings are all basically a function of the material and construction type from then and from building in brick that way. And so I don't know that if we're doing, I don't know that that will apply and work as well in newer construction types, basically. And so I think that we'd often do much larger, kind of wider spanning windows. And so there's a little bit of, I just think that language kind of might need to be thought out a little bit more. And then the other thing was in terms of so there's a lot of talk about this kind of idea of the separation of base and upper. Does that have to be, it sounds like from this that has to be in terms of actual massing where there is a step back at, 30 feet or whatever it is, right? Is that kind of the...
Yeah, I mean, we have step back requirements, but it's not necessarily a step back. It could be an architectural feature. We do want a defined base for buildings over 3 stories. It doesn't necessarily need to be a step back. The step back language is for facade length. That being said, we do have step back requirements in 21A37 for,
so
for
it's
different zones.
The step back of 30 feet, there has to be a 10-foot step back as part of the facade length one, not part of the...
So yeah, so we have in the design review, we have that language, which I would, we need some guidance on. But then in like the base design standards, we also have step back requirements for, that just depend on the zoning district.
Gotcha. So a lot of the buildings I really love don't have a physical step back, right? And that's not how the base is defined. It's defined with like a different kind of floor to floor and how the windows are detailed out and, like places along Main Street and things like that. So I actually dislike generally that kind of step back because it creates the look of, podium and then there's the part above. Yeah. And I think it makes it a really easy way to put crappy material up above because you're breaking this plane, and so you can just do stucco, everything high, and only kind of put something nice down lower. So generally, I at least just kind of personally don't think we should kind of mandate that step back because I think that a much better way to create that kind of base, like pedestrian experience, is with kind of detailing and insets and things like that, rather than it being a separate mass. So.
Okay, I can look at 37, it's not part of this amendment. Just to speak to that, for the step back under the design review standards, right now that's just for street facing facade length
Okay, gotcha.
requests.
Okay.
So if we change the facade length issue to something else, then we wouldn't necessarily, I mean, part of all of this, part of what you're saying and part of the intention of all this is to make bigger buildings seem smaller, which, aren't we a grown-up city? Can't we have big buildings? Yeah. Do we?
That's why we increased heights.
It seems to me like a big building can be pretty nice, and we actually have a few contemporary modern buildings, in our downtown that are, they don't have coffee shops on the ground floor, and they're maybe not as active as we'd like, but one of the reasons to have step backs is basically wind, so you have the wind shear coming down the building and just blows you to pieces, and that's why they did it in New York. But they liked having the tall buildings, so.
Right, and
I'm just not sure that always saying everything has to seem like it's smaller than it is, or be like it's, or have this, this, reduce the length, reduce the height, reduce the width, it's all reduction of the apparent size of a building. I think we might rethink that in the future. I mean, buildings are, big buildings can be lovely. It's me.
More eloquent way of what I was thinking about. I'm an architect, I like monolithic buildings. So.
Well, if there's no further feedback, we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think before we go to the regular agenda, we'll take a 5-minute break here, but also a reminder if anyone came in that number 2 on the regular agenda, the zoning map amendment with Cheyenne Street has been withdrawn. That application's been withdrawn, so we won't be considering that. But let's go ahead and come back at 7:01. Item number 1 of the regular agenda is plan development and preliminary subdivision plat for Innovation Park at Liberty Wells at approximately 707 South, 400 East. Case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00789 and case number PLN SUB 2024-00137. And our planner is Ben Buckley.
Good evening. Like he said, I am Ben. This is Innovation Park at Liberty Wells, plan development and preliminary subdivision. Quick overview. This is a 66-unit plan development, 30 multifamily units within the existing Liberty Wells Center. The applicants are proposing to retrofit it, and then they will build 36 new single-family attached, also known as townhomes, on the vacant field to the south. It'll be split into 8 buildings. You can see the site plan there. Our recommendation is approval with the condition that the applicant submits for a final plat. The requested modifications for the single-family attached lots, there are 26 lots without public street frontage. Maximum building coverage is exceeded on 20 of the single-family attached lots. 22 of the lots do not have the required minimum lot width. 26 lots do not have the minimum required front yard setbacks, and all 36 townhome lots do not have the minimum rear yard. For the entire development, they all need the minimum lot size modified. The minimum EV-ready parking stalls they want to have modified, and the ground-mounted utility box requirements. Here is the existing site. On the left is the Liberty Wells Center. That is what they are proposing to retrofit into 30 new multifamily apartments. And then there is the vacant field on the right, where 8 new structures that have various counts of single-family attached townhomes will be built. Quick overview again, number of units we've already discussed, 66 total units, 30 multifamily, 36 single-family attached. It will be on 2.48 acres. That works out to just over 26 and a half dwelling units per acre. This is within the RMF 35 zoning district. That district does require 103 total parking stalls. The applicant is providing 105. Here are the proposed elevations of the north and south exteriors. The red boxes, those are new windows. Blue boxes are windows or doors that they are closing permanently. In between the windows in the middle, you can see a kind of plank-like material that will be used to fill in that space. Here's the existing facades that kind of show the difference between the two. These windows that are existing do not meet building code requirements for egress, so they need to be brought up to code for that purpose. These are the elevations of the single-family attached. This is the 5-unit. The 3 units will be basically identical. There will just be 2 of the middle units removed. They meet all the zoning requirements in terms of height and things like that. City plan compatibility. This project meets or is compatible with 4 different city plans: Housing SLC, Plan Salt Lake, Thriving in Place, and the Central Community Master Plan. Most of the policies that they are compatible with range or are focused on housing affordability, and historic preservation. This project is proposing 75% of the units to be rented at or below 80% AMI. 28 units specifically at 80%, 14 units at 60, and 7 units at 50% AMI. The remaining units will be rented at market rate. As we just discussed, they meet the historic preservation and the housing plan development objectives as well. Historic preservation, the Liberty Wells Center, it's 75 years old. It's not a formally designated historic structure in the Central City local historic district. It's not even in a local historic district, but it served as a community gathering place, and it's been around for quite a while. And then as mentioned and fleshed out in the staff report, 75% of the units are going to be at an affordable rate, where the plan development objective only requires 20%. Again, our recommendation is to approve with the condition that the applicant submits for a final plat. This meets the plan development standards, and it generally meets the zoning standards. And with that, that is my presentation.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have the applicant come forward. And state your names for the record.
My apologies. Peter Gamverlis.
Amroel Nimri.
Thank you. Go ahead and provide us with any presentation or additional information that you have.
Great. We didn't provide a presentation. We want to be short and sweet. We thank the Planning Commission for having us and reviewing our petitions. We also want to thank Ben and Aaron for guiding us through the plan development process and previous lot consolidation process. I'm personally with Ivory Development, which is our for-profit wing, and I've had this opportunity to help Ivory Innovations, a nonprofit who AMRO is representing, as the applicant for this because of my previous experience working in Salt Lake City on some of these plan development applications. So I've been really excited to do a project that I otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to do, namely in the building preservation. The Liberty Wells Center and the associated property was donated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the foundation with the express purpose that we were able to conduct and make a preservation work for this. So it's been really neat and something that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to done under our usual for-profit circumstances. So among that, and with the 70% of the units that are affordable, that goes above and beyond, of course, the plan development standards. It's something we were intending to do even before we thought we'd have to do a plan development here. Really, the reason we appeared with an application for a plan development was because the site plan, while fitting the zone in terms of use and density, would not have worked for the amount of buildings we wanted to do. We would have had to front 2 or large buildings to get the same amount of units. And it also gave an opportunity for us to subdivide this for an opportunity for this to have multiple ownership at some point in the future. So I want to defer the rest of my time to AMRO to just give a little introduction to Ivory Innovations and their efforts throughout actually the city and the state, and in particular with the Liberty Wells Center.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all, and good evening. My name is Amro, and I work as a projects manager at Ivory Innovations. Just a quick brief about Ivory Innovations. Ivory Innovations started in 2017 as a research center at the David Eccles School of Business. They focus on innovation in housing affordability through multiple programs that targets startup companies and focuses also on students. In 2020, the Ivory Innovations Operating Foundation was started as a nonprofit operating foundation with a charitable purpose of building affordable housing. As Ben and Peter mentioned, 75% of our units should be rented at 80% AMI or less. Only 25% should be rented at market rate. which is to make the finances of projects work.
So we're available for questions. We wanted to keep it short, so.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions from the commission before we open public hearing? We will go ahead and open the public hearing. We have a representative from Central City Community Council, so we'll go ahead and have them start off. State your name for the record, and you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take that long. My name's Rihanna Riggs, and I am the chair of Central City Neighborhood Council. The council generally approves of this project because it supports one of our goals, which is to bring more family-sized housing to our neighborhood. It also has the potential to achieve another goal, which is to bring more for-sale housing opportunities to our community. However, Ivory hasn't committed to sell any of the townhomes yet. One of the council's biggest concerns with this project is that it's across the street from one of the most problematic apartment complexes in the city, which is River Rock. We are very concerned that the problems that exist at River Rock could spill over into this development and exacerbate the safety and crime issues that we've seen over the years. And we're not sure Ivory knows how to handle some of those issues that we've seen. One solution to avoid this is to sell the townhomes instead of rent them. Only 12% of homes in Central City are owner-occupied. Adding for-sale housing to this neighborhood would create stability, community pride, and wealth-building opportunities with generational impact. The council encourages Ivory to consider this incredible opportunity it has to use its skill set as Utah's #1 home builder to develop family-sized for-sale homes in this area that desperately needs it. That would be truly innovative. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 cards so far. Jake Wilkerson is the first card. If you want to go ahead and step up to the microphone and okay, gotcha. Let me go to the next card is Doug Herscher. Same, okay. Well, is there anyone who would like to give public comment that didn't fill out a card? Seeing no one, we'll check and see if we've received any emails. We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to make a motion.
Sorry, real quick, first before that, is the adaptive reuse a requirement of the plan development?
It is not a requirement, but there is an objective for it. The historic preservation, they do meet that with the adaptive reuse of the Liberty Well Center.
Okay, but it's not like a requirement of...
Correct. They just need to meet one of the plan development objectives. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 6 plan development objectives, and they just have to meet one of those 6. Yeah. Okay. And that happens to be one of them.
Okay.
Okay. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve this plan development application as recommended by the staff.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion from Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Tuttle. Any discussion to the motion? Let's vote. Commissioner Berry.
I'm a huge fan of adaptive reuse, so I'm really excited that you are utilizing this building for that. So I vote yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Kretzik.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes, and I agree with the idea that there should be for sale options available on.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
and the chair will also vote yes. That
Thank you.
passes unanimously. We will go ahead and move to the next item, and
Point of order, do we have to do a plan development and a preliminary subdivision plat?
thanks for pointing that out, because yes, we do still need the other motion. So let's go ahead.
Mr. Chair, based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve this preliminary subdivision application as recommended by staff.
I second.
Okay. We have a motion from Commissioner Shear and a second from Commissioner Burrows. Any discussion to the motion? Let's vote. Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. That passes unanimously, and thanks again to Commissioner Shear for catching that. We will go ahead and move on. Once again, item number 2, the Cheyenne Street zoning map amendment has been withdrawn, so we will move on to item number 3. Electronic Message Centers text amendment, case number PLN PCM 2023-00669, and Caitlin Harris is our planner.
Katie Lynn, actually.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Let me get this pulled up. All right, so before I start, just gonna make it aware that I'm gonna take longer than 5 minutes just because there's been so much public interest. I wanna make sure that I answer maybe some questions that you might have, address some of the concerns, and hopefully facilitate a better discussion afterwards. So this is for the, thank you, Commissioner Berry. This is for the text amendment concerning electronic sign faces, also known as electronic messaging centers. The request was initiated by the City Council, and they directed staff to provide recommendations from best practices concerning things like brightness, dwell and twirl times, animation, etc., and to ensure that those standards comply with state and federal law. Our recommendation is Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. So, summary of the changes, we will be going over these in detail later in the presentation. And just as a point to make sure you're considering, all these standards only apply to on-premise signs. We're not touching anything related to billboards. So, first thing we're doing is updating the term to electronic message centers, and we're creating standards for dwell time, twirl time, and motion. We're also creating standards concerning brightness and display hours. We're limiting electronic signs in single and two-family residential districts, as well as sensitive wildlife areas in the northwest quadrant. So a little bit of background, so we're all talking about the same thing. An electronic message center is just a part of a sign. It's not the entire sign itself most often. On these examples, these are from the city I took this week. It's just the electronic portion. The rest of the sign is just your standard like panel or just your regular non-electronic sign. It's like the Domino's, Box and Lock, the dentist sign, and then Mountain America actually has a sign that is exclusively EMC, but they also have like building signage as well. Here are a few more. This one at Trolley Square, and then also a gas station sign. I do want to reiterate that gas station price signs are an exempt sign in the zoning code, meaning that any gas station price sign that is 50 square feet or less is exempt from all zoning regulation or all sign regulations, including the ones that are proposed tonight. I included them more as an example of, like, you can see kind of how the mix of signs can work. So the proposed regulations. The first thing is we're adding a couple definitions, the EMC, dwell time, and twirl time. The EMC message, the electronic message center definition reads, a portion of an on-premise sign face that is capable of displaying words, symbols, figures, graphics, or images that can be electronically changed by remote or automatic means. And this will replace the existing term electronic changeable copy. And we're going to replace that throughout the sign ordinance, so anywhere electronic changeable copy appears, we'll be updating that to electronic message center. We're also adding dwell time, and dwell time is literally just a fancy way of saying how long a message needs to stay on the screen before it changes to another message. Twirl time is the amount of time it takes from one message to change to the next message, so it's like the transition time. So the next set of standards concern light and lighting. They address sign brightness, require an automatic dimmer and a default black screen, and also display hours. So brightness, the proposed standard is 0.3 foot candles measured at a specific distance that's related to the size of the sign, and that's an industry standard, so we're just going with that. The reasoning for this is that ambient lighting conditions need to be accounted for to keep the sign legible, so it's not too dim during the day like that top sign, or too bright at night like that bottom sign. Then we're also requiring that all electronic sign faces, new, I might add, like if there's existing signs that don't have these, we won't be required to add them. So all electronic sign faces will be equipped with an automatic dimmer, and this is to allow the sign to adjust to lighting conditions in real time to prevent the sign from becoming too bright at night. The next standard is in the event of a screen malfunction, the electronic sign face must be set to a default black screen, and that's to prevent a nuisance of a bright white screen on the surrounding environment while that sign is being fixed. The next standard is related to display hours. The electronic sign face must be turned off between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. unless the associated business is open for business during those hours. So this doesn't affect businesses that are 24/7. And also if business closes at 2 a.m., they can keep their sign on until 2 a.m. And also just want to reiterate that this only affects the electronic message center portion of the sign. So like on this one, that top portion, it's in orange. The rest of the signs don't need to be turned off if they don't want to. And the reasoning for this is twofold. One is to limit unnecessary light pollution at night in accordance with the mayor's dark sky goals, and also to prevent a nighttime nuisance to neighbors to neighboring residential properties. So the next set of standards to concern the display itself. We require, again, because these are on-premise signs, they're required to advertise on-premise uses and services. If they're advertising off-premise business, that would make them an off-premise sign, which would be regulated under the billboard standards and not these standards. The next standard is related to motion, and the proposed standard is that electronic sign face messages must be static. Transition effects are permitted, provided they comply with the twirl time. And if you'll notice, I've been using transitions on these slides that kind of mimic what that would look like. The reasoning for this is This already exists in the current code. The existing code prohibits animation. This standard is purely to clarify that because it's not super clear in the current code, even though that's the intent. We're just clarifying. The next standards relate to dwell and twirl time. The proposed standards, each message shall remain on the screen for a minimum of 8 seconds before transitioning to the next message. The transition can take a maximum of 0.25 seconds. And as an example of what this looks like, this sign is on the corner of 500 South and State Street, and they comply with this already, so I just took a video earlier this week to kind of show you what that looks like. And you can hear the lovely car traffic as well. And the reason we did this is to just make it consistent with the standards that already exist for billboards. Because this was one of the issues that a lot of people who commented had an issue with this standard. I created a few animations to show you what 8 seconds look like and then what a 3-second dwell time looks like. So this is the 8-second dwell time with a 0.25 transition time. So that was 8 seconds, and then this one is 3 seconds. So that's kind of what it looks like, because it's kind of hard to get a conceptualization of what these numbers mean, so that's hopefully helps. The next standard relates to the location of these signs and which zones they're not allowed in. So these are not going to be allowed in single and two-family residential districts. They also won't be permitted in the eco buffer and natural areas of the Northwest Quadrant. If there are any signs in these zones that already exist, they will be allowed to remain as non-conforming uses. And the idea is to prevent nuisance to the residential uses and sensitive wildlife areas. Just because I know most people aren't familiar with the Northwest Quadrant, this is a screenshot of the overlays. There are 3 parts. There's the development area, which is that large bit in the middle. These signs will be permitted in that development area. They will not be permitted in the eco-industrial buffer area, which is kind of like that chunky line that goes around the development area. And then they also will not be permitted in the natural area, which is the open space and agricultural zones you see on that map. And this is purely to protect the wildlife that's out there from nighttime light. So as you are aware, we received a lot of interest from the public on this. And so I wanted to kind of summarize the commonly occurring issues that they took. I also want to take a second to tell the people who are here tonight or who are listening in, we genuinely appreciate their input. And it's encouraging to see that we have so many engaged residents and business owners that care about our city. So the 3 most commonly occurring issues amongst all the comments related to display hours, dwell time, and motion. So for display hours, businesses want to be able to advertise their services to the night crowd. So like swing shift, night shift, and people who are just out and about at night more often, like Uber drivers. They also, a couple comments also pointed out that this could potentially interfere with private signs that are part of the integrated public alert and warning system. Now, I'm not intimately familiar with that system, so I'm not sure how that works or how many of these private signs are actually part of that system. There were also some concerns with the safety aspect, as these signs can produce a lot of light at night, and that light can assist with safety on the streets in those areas. The next concerns with dwell time is that 8 seconds is too long and it interferes with the full potential of these sign types, and businesses want to have the flexibility with how long messages are displayed. And then the final concern dealt with motion. Business owners want to have access to the innovative abilities that come with animation, and prohibiting that stifles some of the creative opportunity. I do want to reiterate that animation is already prohibited on all sign types in the city, so this isn't really an example of taking something that was permitted and making it not permitted anymore. It's just clarifying what we already have. And with that, that's my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission before we open up public hearing? Well, let's go ahead and open up the public hearing. We have multiple cards. So first off, we have Jake Wilkerson. If you'd like to go ahead and approach the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
I'm Jake Wilkerson, and what else was I supposed to state? I'm sorry.
Oh, just state your name for the record.
Perfect. So I'd like to talk about dwell time, twirl time, and animation.
I'm sorry, sir. Can you please pick up the microphone?
Absolutely. That's more comfortable for me too, thanks. I'd like to talk about dwell time, twirl time, and animation. I'm not aware of which code limits animation, so more clarification on that would be interesting, but I'll talk more on dwell time and twirl time. So there are a couple EMCs that I've personally been involved in. I go out with the customers, I teach them how to use their sign, fire it up. And we have like the Holy Cross, Salt Lake Regional. They have a few signs, and we also have the parking spot over here on the west side. Each of those signs, they're used quite a bit differently, but the reason why dwell time in 8 seconds is a bit long depends on the sign size. I saw billboard size signs here, and you could put up one message and get a lot of information across in a short, in one display, but smaller signs, 2 by 3 or something like that, 8 seconds to say flowers on set, you got to wait for the rest of the 8 seconds to say L, beginning on, it's not very effective. That's a lot of time. So the twirl time, the message going in and out, would be very limiting for their message they're trying to send out. Our customers need to be able to have a shorter dwell time and twirl time. Otherwise, it's going to affect it'll affect the city's income from that the company would make in revenue. And I hear a lot about how small businesses are the driving force of our economy, and we want to support them. Some of these rules really seem like they might limit some of that in advertisement. That's all.
Thank you. Next up, we have Doug Herscher. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
I'm Doug Herscher. I'm glad to be here. I'm a member of the Utah Sign Association as a secretary, and also a supplier to the industry that we're discussing. Signage is such an important part of our lives. We sometimes don't recognize it until we need something really important. But the animation from the signs is a welcoming feature. We go into a lot of places and we see signs that are on actually pretty much all night long. And it's a warm and welcoming feeling to be able to go to a city, a community where that light really provides a sense of safety. Not so much just an irritant, but it also helps people in the community feel like, oh, this is a nice place to be. I can recognize certain businesses that I frequent, and this allows me to know that this is a place that I can feel comfortable. And I'm here to support industry here, and grateful for the time just to let you know how I feel about the sign industry and how important it is in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Vince Cooley. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, Vince Coley, Rainbow Neon Sign Company. This proposed EMC regulations is highly restrictive to the on-premise business owners. They have invested financially to upgrade their product awareness and information to the public. Imposing a curfew devalues the financial asset by 30%. 8-second dwell times on a typical city block devalues that left by 1/2. For example, driving down the street, you get one informational message instead of 3. While existing EMCs fall under these new guidelines, if so, you're opening up a liability for theft or an existing services. Schools will not be affected by this. They're on their own entity and will go on as business as usual. I suggest an educational campaign to existing EMC users and new upcoming users as to some sort of problems associated with brightness and rapid flashing that can have a negative effect in recruiting new businesses. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up is James Carpentier. Well, while we have you up here, can we just have you go ahead and go? And state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm James Carpentier with the International Sign Association and the Utah Sign Association, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And we are very supportive of the illumination guidelines, since that is really the biggest problem that we see throughout the country is not so much how it operates, but how bright the sign is. And these guidelines will work really well, and they're proven throughout the country. However, we do have several concerns with the proposed regulations. And the first one I'd like to mention is the 8-second hold time that's been talked about. We recommend that there be a tiered approach versus one-size-fits-all approach, where the neighborhood type districts have the 8-second hold time and then allow something lesser as far as hold time and animation in the other more intense commercial and industrial districts. And secondly, I'd like to just also mention that we are opposed to the curfew, and there's a number of reasons. A lot of it revolves around safety. Quite frankly, a lot of activities take place after hours, such as deliveries, or there could be some other activities, and I think emergency services wouldn't mind having signs on at night. And the third one is the not allowing the EMCs in residential districts. I think that that's something that is an issue when it comes to some permitted uses, such as churches in residential districts. I think they should be allowed in a residential districts with some clearly different guidelines, a little more strict than commercial industrial, such as the 8-second hold time and some separation setbacks, etc. I think that that's something that should be considered for sure, because a lot of churches like to have EMCs to convey information to the public. And therefore, due to these concerns, we respectfully request that the commission turn this back to staff to resolve some of these issues and work with the stakeholders, including Utah Sign Association and International Sign Association. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mark Thacker. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Mark Thacker. I've had some prior experience being on a planning commission and also experience applying for permits. And so I think it's really important, as Caitlin mentioned, that the code is clear, both to planners and to applicants. And so I just had a couple of comments and concerns on some of the things in the proposed code. One is W, where it says unless otherwise exempt. So if that only means the gas price changes, then that should be clarified. If it's something else, there probably should be some more clarification there. Secondly is point 5, as far as the display hours. It doesn't really seem equitable to regulate businesses that have invested in a message center, but allow every other business to have their signs on all night. Number 7.A, automatic dimmer. I agree. Its sign should be dimmed. The example of the super bright sign, nobody likes that. The sign, business doesn't like that. Business owners don't like it. Residents, drivers, no one likes super bright signs. So there should be, brightness is an issue. It's usually why there's always changes to the sign codes, is because of brightness. Point 7B, the blank screen if the sign malfunctions. I think malfunction probably needs to be specified and clarified as exactly what that means. Does it mean if part of the sign is out, that the whole thing goes off? Typically, they do not go to all white. Rarely would a sign go to all white. I work with a number of electronic sign manufacturers, and it's not built into their systems to go all white. So for an electronic message center, if part of it goes out, then usually they'll get it fixed. The same as you wouldn't want to tell, Planet Fitness across the street if one of their letters went out, they have to turn the whole sign off. Point 8, message centers are just monitors. So this mentions something about before the permit is issued, that all these things have to be figured out, and it's just a monitor. So that's not really built into a sign to be able to limit. That's all based on how they use it in the software. So thank you.
Thank you. Eric Corbin. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Eric Corbin, Vice President of Real Estate Design and Construction at Mountain America Credit Union. Thought it was fitting to have our picture up there, although you got the other side of the sign. I think my perspective is going to be slightly different than others because I'm representing the credit union and our membership. And the reason why, and perhaps even other FIs for that matter, but the reason why I wanted to be here tonight was because there are a couple of impacts with some of these regulations that are proposed that I think would impact us in a way, and our membership in a way that might be negative. One of those things, for example, might be, well, let me explain. We use these signs as a way to bring in membership. So an on-prem versus off-prem, because we build branches and we have an on-prem presence that is messaging to the public, it's important for that messaging to represent rates, for example, or any services that we can offer to the community. And community is a big part of obviously why we exist since 1934. The idea of short or lengthening the time, for example, on the screen, a gentleman mentioned passing by and the time in which it might take to not get that message. It'd be important for us and other institutions like us to be able to get as much of that message out to as many people as possible. Some of those messages, for example, are related to lower rates or opportunities for people to meet their financial dreams. Lower rates, I bring that up because just last year, for example, we were able to help people recognize over $174 million of savings, in part because they were able to use these signs to be able to come in and then talk to financial advisors to better their lives. That's just an example of why this matters to us. And I think by creating some limitations that could negatively impact our community, unfortunately could then impact the individual that we are trying to serve. I think that's important to take note of. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Young. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's Jeff Young, and I'm part of the ownership of Young Electric Sign Company, also known as YESCO. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes. Katie, all due respect to you, animation not allowed. We're going to have to talk because everyone's animating their signs in town. So I acknowledge Ken Garf. We can talk about that, but everyone else wants to animate, and this has been a bit of a firestorm for us this past week or so. I want to mention a couple of things. Everyone we're talking to wants animation. Everyone we talk to wants their signs on all night. Last week, I got up, did an all-night drive through town. I would say 60 or 70% of all signs are illuminated at night. People you wouldn't think would be illuminating their signs overnight are. We hope to hear from Western Nut in a minute. Okay? Why are they wanting to advertise all night long? Okay? They do. They want to advertise all night long for all the good reasons. I also, when we start talking about signs, it's like when we drive around town, that's all we look at. I would encourage and challenge all of you, when you drive home tonight, to take signs out of your brain for just a minute and just look at where the light's coming from. Number one is headlights on cars. They are dramatically more bright than anything you see. Number two, taillights on cars. Number three, traffic lights. They are really, really bright. Next, lighting. You have 200 fixtures on this property, roughly. There's an immense amount of light coming from that. Signs are not, with this lighting standard, signs are really not that bright and not affecting everyone. Let me mention, as you drive home and you pass millions of objects, every lighted object you see is going to be moving. It's going to be moving in space. The ones close to you moving faster, those farther away, not so fast. Our brain does a phenomenal job, specifically the reticular activation system, to keep us in our lane of traffic. The studies show that sign glances are only 1 second long. That's it. Well below the 2-second threshold of the Virginia Tech Transportation and the federal highways. These signs are safe, and that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny Ramirez. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Danny Ramirez. I'm coming here today in front of the Planning Commission to oppose the proposed amendment for the change of electronic message centers. As a citizen, I believe we have a fundamental right and obligation to protect and support businesses across this city. The business owners have invested a significant amount of their own time, energy, and in some cases their life savings to thrive in our community. It's important that we allow them to advertise their brand, the goods and services to help support the community at large. Mandating a curfew on their signs will only hurt their ability to maintain a presence in the area. We have citizens that work swing shifts and graveyard shifts each day and night. We should not be hindering the business owners' right to advertise only to the people that work 9 to 5. We need to make sure all citizens have a choice to see what is available to them no matter what time it is. I believe that instituting more restrictions will have a negative effect on our overall economy. We should be more business friendly and support creativity to help promote growth. By limiting each message to 8 seconds and mandating troll time limits that creativity. Please work with the community to help grow the economy and not mandate more restrictions.
Thank you. Jeff Krantz. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Jeff Krantz, K-R-A-N-T-Z, and I am with Young Electric Sign Company, but I'm actually an account executive, and I am representing several clients that are affected by this and that are very concerned. And I just wanted to, the 8-second hold time, well, let me first say, your code is actually well written the way it is now. It says that the animation or the, I think it was a little bit misrepresented on the graphic, it isn't 3 seconds of dwell time, it's 3 seconds more of the new definition of twirl time. Your code says that the message needs to be readable within 3 seconds. And that gives the creativity. That's what we're talking about in the way of the lack of creativity, to bring in a message. So it needs to convey a message within 3 seconds. That's why your code is currently written. And I work with codes all over the entire country, and that's one of the best ways to say it. Limiting actually dwell time. A lot of the 8-second, or a lot of the different things that come from the outdoor industry in the way of dimming and brightness, that's all great from coming from an off-premise. But the 8-second comes from the off-premise industry, and that's for 14 by 48 billboards that can have 7 to 11 words on them. And as Jake had said before, a lot of these guys have customers have a very small sign. They can't just keep reducing their copy to convey a message. They need, the traffic's different on different streets, the speed, and they don't want to do the wrong thing. They want to convey, the businesses want to convey a message, and they need to have the ability to say free car wash with fill up. They can't, if you regulate them out to 8 seconds, that traffic's gone. They're not getting a full message. They're not able to convey a full message. And by showing the Ken Garff display, that's a 20-something foot long display, yeah, they can have a lot of words on it. So by going to an 8-second hold time, it's very limiting for conveying of a message. So, and the 3 seconds really is written well to be able to give some creativity. The other thing is the malfunctions. Most malfunctions just are really just a dead spot or a discolored spot. I suppose if you have a really terrible malfunction that is actually causing flashing or blinking, then yes, it makes sense to shut the sign off. But most of the malfunctions are not that. That's a very rare thing to have something that's actually creating flashing or blinking. So I just wanted to oppose also the shut-off time at night for my clients. Thank you.
Frank Pignanelli. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm an attorney that lives and works in Salt Lake City, and I'm proud to represent Maverick. Maverick really tries to work hard to be a good corporate citizen. They're the largest provider of petroleum and convenience store products, not only in the state, but in the Intermountain area. And obviously signage is important to them, not just for commercial reasons, but also for public safety reasons. And we concur, especially with the letters submitted by the Utah Sign Association and the comments made by Mr. Young and Yesco, and I would ask you to take a look at those. We appreciate the good work and hard work of Caitlin, but we are asking for an opportunity for the stakeholders to meet with her and other staff members to see what are the real problems that are existing. There's some issues that maybe we can be resolved through better crafting the ordinances. There's some issues that really don't exist, and we can proceed with our commercial enterprises. Again, Maverick is appreciative of the opportunities to provide input and to hopefully interact with the staff so we can craft something that we can all concur that promotes commercial enterprises, but at the same time protects public safety.
Thank you. Matt Phillips. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Phillips. I'm a member of the Utah Sign Association and also an owner of the membership, or a member of the ownership group of Allied Electric Sign and Awning. So I'm here to represent our customers as well. I agree with many of the things that have been said so far. I think to add something unique here, in my research, one of the guiding principles of the Salt Lake Plan is to provide a balanced economy that produces quality jobs and fosters an environment for commerce, local business, and industry to thrive. And as we've talked about some of the limitations that this new wording would create, I think it's in direct opposition to the ability to allow industry and local business to thrive. I won't reiterate the specific points, but we do believe that a number of the proposed wording changes are great and we are in support of, particularly around the illumination requirements and limiting that. But anything that these changes will do to limit a small business's opportunity to advertise, to grow, to catch the attention of potential customers, we feel is not in line with what has been stated in the Salt Lake Plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah Hansey. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you for having me. I am strongly opposed to the different restrictions that have been placed. I would like that put on the record. I would like to start out briefly, just a few sentences, with a personal experience. My grown children have decided to say that I have maplexia and not dyslexia. And the meaning behind that is that I do get turned around sometimes late at night when I'm driving home. One experience was going from the gateway after work late at night to home. There was a young boy on a skateboard that I did not see because it was dark. And because of the well-lit sign, I was able to stop and not do him harm. Thank you for the service you give.
Thank you. Kimberly Howe. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm Kimberly Howe, and I have concern about some of the proposed changes to sign code concerning 8-second hold time as well as the curfew. I believe that this has a potential to hurt small businesses more than any others. Just in the last couple months, I've used electronic signs to pull my business into small businesses. On 33rd South, there are a couple that I particularly remember. One is for a small wholesale flower shop, and the sign indicated to me the flowers that they were selling and that they were open for business. I didn't even know that they were open during the winter months. I didn't know that there was a place that I could shop. And similarly, they didn't have an online presence. Like, I had Googled them, there wasn't other information. They had chosen to utilize this sign to draw the community in. And it doesn't stand a chance in that advertising space to compete against other large commercial garden options. Another has to do with the beautiful new Mill Creek Commons that was built. And concerning the 8-second hold time, by the time 8 seconds is over, I'm lucky to have seen one sign or one advertisement, much less two, because there aren't stoplights, there isn't time to really take in the things. So they really have one shot to pull me in. And if the particular thing that they were advertising was a farmer's market, I didn't know that they even had farmer's markets. I was aware of a skating rink, but if they had been advertising mini golf or an auto show, it wouldn't have pulled me in. But I had a chance to see several different advertisements that were able to communicate to me. So I guess my plea to you all is to put a pause on this for a moment, take the time to really pull in the community, whether it be small businesses, big businesses, consumers, and let's find a solution that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. David Jones. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thanks. My name's David Jones. This is the first time I've done anything like this. I read about this issue, and I thought it was really fascinating, the two sides of this. On the surface, it feels like one of those classic cases where there's people on one side of the issue who feel one way and people on the other side of the issue that feel the opposite way, and there's a divisive sort of difference in the way that they think. And the more I think about this issue, and as I look at this committee who are taking time away from their families to make a decision on this issue, I just want to make a case in opposition to the proposed changes that businesses that are investing so heavily in an electronic message center like this, they're doing it for a good reason. And you wouldn't want to make an investment in something and then have that investment limited by a lot of regulatory policy. We had to do things that are responsible, certainly. And I think that there's some proposed changes that are made with the best of intentions to be responsible. However, it feels like in this instance, there's an opportunity for a win-win. And right now we're set up for a win-lose. For a lot of businesses to lose the ability to be creative in their advertising. And so I would just suggest that we look at this again and look for a win-win. I really believe that there's an opportunity to do that. As I look specifically at at least what I read, point 5 about the curfew, points 1 and 2 about animation and dwell time, and then also there's a point deep in there about the controls, 7B, related to some software that, okay, I'll finish, that should turn off the sign. I'm not certain that that even exists. So that's kind of a scary proposition. So I would just ask that we look at this again more carefully.
Thank you. We also have 3 cards with written comment. The first one is from Karsten McCullough, who says, in opposition to the changes, I support the signs to display animation to promote businesses better, helping the economy to grow. And from Spencer Cities, electronic message centers, EMCs, are an important tool for business to relay messages and market to customers. At my company, the use of quick messages allows us to communicate critical safety messages to customers and inform customers of the opportunities. We have to recycle metal and keep our city clean of recyclable metal. Regulating dwell and twirl times and animation and operation of hours of EMCs will hinder our ability to assist customers. In respect to items number 2 and 5, these items will reduce EMC's effectiveness as non-lit up signs do not attract as much attention. And also Ben Olson, who says, several of the proposed changes will be detrimental for businesses and the availability for them to advertise. Placing more restrictions on what is an already fairly restrictive code doesn't help in growth with new business. And that's all the cards we have. Yeah, if you'd like to give comment, go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Lauren Mercer, I own Western Nut Company. I'm the president. I've worked there since 2007. I bought it from my father-in-law in 2018. So I've seen how these signs work. We used to have one of those signs that had light bulbs that were very bright. We went to an LED screen probably 12 years ago, and it's on the end of life, and they want me to replace it, and this definitely makes me hesitate to put money into something like this. If you know, we're on 4 South and 300 West. We have 4 signs that go so that they're going both ways. To get 4 signs, they're about 5 by 4 or 6 by 8, 6 by 3. Not very large. We cannot do what that car dealership did. It would be awesome. But if we show a picture of one of our gifts, and we try to put the words like buy one, get one free, and then say what it is, we can put BOGO, yes. We can do other things, but we need about 3 seconds for a car to see the full message that we want to do. 8 seconds would make it 24, that's too long. Another thing is with regards to the curfew, and I understand that the mayor wants to have the dark sky initiative. Where I live, probably 10 cars go by in that hour from midnight to 6 a.m. But where I work, it's much busier than I think. We're not New York, we're not a 24-hour city, but there are many cars going by that business on 4 South and, 400 South and 300 West. To turn it off just because we're not there doesn't make sense to me. I also would like you to know how many times customers come in and say, hey, I saw this on your sign. And it's because they could read the entire message. If the message is like the ones on the freeway, that are massive, and you can see an entire message for 8 seconds, then that would make sense. But I'm a business owner. A lot of these people here are sign companies, and they're trying to sell me a sign. I'm trying to sell the customers what comes on that sign. Okay, so just the last thing, the signs versus the security issue. We have security lights because we have a problem next to Pioneer Park and those places. The security lights are very bright, but they're for those people to hopefully move them through the parking lot at night when I'm not there. The signs out that we're talking about are not bright like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead and approach the microphone. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Sorry, I don't mean to drag this on. I know I'm looking around and everyone's kind of glazed over. I want to be home, and I'm sure you guys all do too. But I am passionate about this. I do strongly disagree with the changes that are being proposed. We kind of live in a time where the online industry, businesses online, are really sucking the lifeblood out of retail sales, brick and mortar buildings. And we see that. Brick and mortar buildings are going away, and who knows where they'll be in 10 years. And one of the cheapest forms of advertising that I think some of these small businesses and stuff can invest in are these electronic signs. And so they're doing all they can to bring in business. I mean, we're all on our phones, we get advertising all day long, and we're buying stuff. I mean, we've all done this. We've been to, we go to Sportsman's, we go to Cabela's, we look for what we want, and then we go home and buy it. Well, that's good, but it's not good for the economy. And so I think we need to really take a second look at this and really decide, how we want to grow as a community with our businesses and stuff like that. And so, anyway, I just urge us that we take a second look at this and go from there.
Thanks. Can we get your name for the record?
Sorry, I'm Ben Olson, and I did have a card. I wrote on it, but then I decided I wanted to
Gotcha.
talk.
Thanks. Anyone else? State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Joel Warden. I just want to concur with everything that's been said tonight. I don't think I need to repeat many of the points, but I do want it I do want it recorded that I am against this amendment. I think that it is harmful to businesses, and that it takes away the ability to be creative and to draw in customers. It takes away many valuable hours that people are on the streets that could be seeing the messages as they're passing by that will help those businesses to be successful. So I just want to add my opposing vote, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Have we received any emails in the meantime?
We received one, but he was able to speak during the hearing, but there was more detail in there, so I put it in your Dropbox.
Thank you. With that, we will go ahead and close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission.
So there must be some studies somewhere that say what's the ideal dwell time for a sign to convey its information.
We didn't really look for studies concerning that, but I'm not aware of those specific studies. The studies that I did find relate mostly to distraction and safety, as done by the Federal Highway Association and a couple of universities.
Can you explain to me what readable within 3 seconds means?
And that's part of the problem, is that's not really clear in the code. The intent was that this entire message was on the sign at the same time within 3 seconds, and that any other kind of thing was considered animation. Yeah, so it's not super clear. Like that was the intent, but the actual execution isn't really clear, and so we're trying to clarify that.
I went and looked at that chapter 21A46 signs, which everybody, all you industry people I'm sure have seen. And it defines like what are exempt, what signs are exempt. So to say this applies to all signs except those which are exempt, there's a whole section about what signs are exempt from those rules, like gas price signs and like your house number, stuff like that are exempt. There's also an area called the sports arena area that has different rules, right, than these. I found the part of the rule that said that animated signs are not allowed. I found that in the code. I wonder, it does seem like maybe if there's an industry standard of saying that your electronic message center is malfunctioning if a quarter of it goes out or something like that, just goes black. Like maybe our rule about that it should default to an all black number should be more specific about what a malfunction is. Like instead of flashing or something like, you know what I mean? Something like that, so that because I didn't find a definition for malfunction. And if if malfunction is like, well, doesn't look as good as it could, you know what I mean? I think maybe we could be more specific about that. Yeah, that's what I think. I appreciate the comments. I love it when people are invested in things that are happening in our city. I'm a little surprised that there were no comments in favor of this rule, because I don't know. I'm a little surprised that I didn't see any comments, unless you can point me to one. I think that all of the comments that I saw, although there were some repeats over a few days, or people that were here and mailed in comments.
We didn't receive any comments specifically from anyone that is in favor of the entire amendment. There are some comments that said we like some of this, but not these aspects.
Right. And I think your outline of the specific parts that are kind of not popular was reinforced today in the comments that we heard today. Yeah.
So there was a couple of comments discussing small signs that have text that people need to read a full message for. Is there something I'm missing that would be allowed, or is there a sliding way that could happen, or under the way it's written right now, that's a non-permitted use?
You mean like a scrolling message?
It could be a scrolling message, but even just like if it's a small sign and you want to get 2 halves of a sentence, under the way it's written right now, they would have to wait for 8 seconds for half of that sentence, and then another 8 for the second. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Are these electronic message centers allowed in residential districts right now?
Technically, yes, although there are some footnotes in the sign ordinance that maybe could prohibit them, but it's not super clear.
Do you know if those exist?
In residential districts? I haven't seen any, but we also didn't really look that hard.
There might be some associated with churches and schools.
Right.
That's pretty common
Right.
current use of some of these things.
Yeah, and also like if we were to adopt this as written, those signs that are there would be permitted to remain.
Yeah. I'm concerned that we are not hearing from a lot of the population who is not a business, or not a sign business, or not somebody who sells signs, or not somebody who commissions signs, or not somebody who's an attorney for sign people who have signs. So I will speak a little bit as one of those people who's not one of those people, and who live downtown where there's a lot of signs. And so I think the non-animation thing is, from my perspective, I have really big windows. I look out on Buca di Beppo, And I think that, it's already really, there's a lot of light pollution, and I think light pollution is one of the reasons why this has come before us, which really hasn't been spoken about, of course, by the people who are interested in having signs. But light pollution is a serious issue. So I think the dimming part of this issue, I think one person said it's a monitor. Think of it as a monitor. And so we can make rules about the monitor itself. I think it's a little bit, and certainly in terms of dimming or turning it off or whatever, I mean, that's the rule about the monitor. But then you get into the messaging, and I think it's a little more delicate there. I mean, yes, animations are distracting in so many ways, so that's reasonable. I don't know anything about twirl times and dwell time. What was it? Not dwell times.
Yeah, dwell time.
Dwell time. And while it seems to me that it's true that 8 seconds is a long time, especially if you're like driving down the street, you can see this thing maybe a block away, maybe it takes you maybe 4 seconds to drive down the street. I mean, I'm just not sure. I don't know how to judge that, and whether or not what's being said is good or not. So I'm not. I'm open to everyone else's thoughts on this. But as a person who lives downtown, I certainly don't want a lot more animated, flashing, bright signs than are already allowed.
So might I suggest that since we're making a recommendation to the city council, that perhaps we add a couple of points to encourage them to look at a tier approach for dwell times in relationship to the size of the sign, and the appropriateness of the dwell time can be their determination. Because I agree, and I don't know that I am strongly care if it's 3 or 8 seconds, but the city council may. And so just a caveat to encourage them to look at a different approach, and also to evaluate the appropriateness of a curfew, and ultimately that ultimate decision is theirs. And if there are other particular points that we may want to spell out for the city council that we've heard tonight that we think have some merit to take a second look at, it might be appropriate to just kind of add a small little list of however we want to proceed with this. It might be an approach.
I agree with those things. I think that like a clearer picture of why this is coming up is something that I would like to know about, or I would like the council to know about.
Well, the council initiated the petition, so I think they have a clear idea of what they're after.
I guess like it was stated that some policies are just being brought over from billboards, and that doesn't, to me, say anything about like our community or about like the way that those signs are interacting with people on the ground. And so I want to know, like, from a human level, like why this is in the conversation, and not just that it was copied from billboards and that's the standard, but like, what does that do for people? So I don't necessarily need, I mean, I would want that to be presented to the city council if this moves forward. And so, yeah.
Can I just add that a similar text amendment was brought before the city council back in 2005 and was permanently tabled due to some conflicts of interests, and they just never brought it up again. And the 8-second dwell time, dwell time was proposed in that text amendment as well. So that's kind of why we kept it, is because that's what's in our code already, and that's what was proposed before. But we can certainly look at that and see if there's other research out there that suggests a different time is appropriate for what we're looking at.
And Commissioner, I think one reason that we are talking about it is because as we're seeing this, there's a big growth in that, that we're seeing more and more of them, excuse me, and our code is not very clear as to when and where they're allowed, how they should operate. And so I think part of this was for the city council to say, let's clean this up, because we're, like you're saying, businesses want them. And so I think the idea is to not prohibit them, but to just make sure that they have standards and they're just well organized. So it makes sense for us as administrators and for them as people who are selling and buying signs.
I think if we want to go forward with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Catherine or anybody, one of the things that we could do, as Amy was suggesting, or Commissioner Barry was suggesting, is suggest to City Council that we recommend this in terms of the things like the brightness and the restriction in residential areas, and maybe take a much more in-depth look, because I think it's also partly political, at the curfew issue and the issue of dwell and twirl, because these are things which are really about the message as much as they are about the sign. I mean, the curfew issue, you know.
I would suggest that by default, if we make a motion to approve or to forward a positive recommendation, that we point out the things we want them to take a closer look at, and by default, those other things we are saying are good, such as prohibiting them in residential areas, et cetera, so that what we encourage them to look at, because it's up to them what they're going to do, would be the things that we feel like perhaps could benefit from a little bit more scrutiny on their part.
And maybe we don't table it because of the issue of urgency that John was sort of saying, and I think, and everyone here in the audience is also sort of saying, you know, I'm getting ready to buy a sign, or I'm selling these signs and
I agree with that. I also think that since this was initiated by the City Council and it ultimately is their decision, it'll land in their lap as it should, and they can navigate through those waters as they see best.
When
Go ahead.
When you say that we're changing the rules in one section of the sign code for the EMC to match the billboard section is also our code. Like, that's also a Salt Lake City. It's just another part of the same chapter, right?
Yeah, correct.
Like, that's a Salt Lake City rule.
Mm-hmm.
So it just makes the rules for Salt Lake City
consistent across the board.
right, which is always good for everybody, for our rules to be more consistent and easy to understand. And
Sorry. I just do think that there is a difference between just anything that is digital moving all the way up to a 50-foot sign. I think that there's a space where business may be using it, and it's just not big enough for the same purposes that a billboard serves. So I think there is and definitionally we have a difference in that it is this messaging, I can't remember the wording on it, okay. But there is a definitional difference for a reason, and I think that it shouldn't just, it's nice to have consistency, but we also, I think, should be specific to what this is instead of just copying things over. But so I think we've got some things that if we wanted to forward a positive recommendation, I want to get down, figure out what are the specific things that we want to say, these need to be looked at more. And is it just the two that you were stating?
The
I
dwell
would be
time,
interested
dwell
to-
and twirl time.
I would recommend look at a tier approach of the size of the sign in relationship to the twirl time. That is a tongue twister. Twirl time.
Dwell and twirl.
And evaluate the appropriateness of a curfew if there are other specific points that other commissioners would like to encourage the city council to evaluate. Now would be the time to speak up.
I also am just, this may be in the code and I just am not, I don't know about it, but unless permitted, if that like includes churches and schools and community centers and neighborhoods, then then great. I don't think we need to add anything about unless permitted.
We reviewed school sign ordinance. What was that? Like 3 years ago?
Pole sign.
That was last year.
2 years. Oh, well. Okay. And they were, a lot of this was very similar to what we talked about with that in relationship to the messaging. And so there was a lot of consistency to that. And they are they're regulated separately. So I think what you have brought up is either regulated separately, like perhaps a church, I don't know if churches are, but schools are. And then existing signs then would be grandfathered in that respect.
Okay.
But I think that most of what you brought up is kind of already separately regulated.
Okay, then I don't want to.
Was that really last year? Oh, wow. Okay.
All signs.
Like that was years ago.
I'm in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation with maybe consider these things that are particularly problematic for the people who use and sell these signs. I also think if you're a person who doesn't like bright signs or animation on signs, then you should make a comment when this comes in front of the city council, because that side, if there is a side, if there's an argument to be made on that side, is not heard in this report so far. So.
Okay.
Last thing,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to keep dragging this out, everyone. I also think like more research or understanding about emergency alert systems and like what that entails, whether how that functions, and then presenting that information to the community, to the council as well, if we go that way.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm willing to take a stab at a motion.
Okay.
All right, based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission forward a positive recommendation to adopt this text amendment to the City Council for PLN PCM 2023-00669 with the additional comments to 1, look at a tier approach versus the size of the sign in relationship to the dwell time and twirl time. 2, evaluate the appropriateness of a curfew. And 3, better understand the importance or the usage of emergency messaging.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Commissioner Berry and a second from Commissioner Scheer. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. That forwards a positive recommendation onto the city council with attached suggestions. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks.
Our next and final item is driveways and loading text amendment. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00937. And our planner is Madison Blodgett. Go ahead.
So this is a text amendment for amending driveways and loading standards. Mayor Aaron Mendenhall has initiated a zoning amendment to correct driveway and loading standards found in the zoning code that are creating unintended consequences. The proposed changes fix issues with the current standards to adequately address vehicle access needs and support good urban design. And the recommendation is to forward a positive recommendation to City Council to approve the proposed text amendment. So these identified issues that staff has found include the maximum combined driveway width standards that are listed in Table 21A 44060C. The code currently applies the maximum driveway width permitted for each zone to all driveways on a lot combined. This has resulted in situations where the number and size of driveways are inconsistent to the use and lot size. This has especially impacted manufacturing zones where there are large lots with industrial uses that have large vehicles accessing the property. The applicability of driveway width standards, as written in the current code, the driveway width standards only apply to the front and corner side yards. This creates issues for applications since there are zones that do not have required front and corner side yards. On lots in these zones, since there's not a required front or corner side yard, to apply the width standards to an unlimited driveway, it basically would allow for unlimited driveways. Another issue is that the code does not clearly distinguish driveways versus access, even though there are separate sections and standards for each. And lastly, the loading area requirements and standards. Currently, certain uses are required to provide off-street loading areas. The requirement itself, in addition to its design, has led to valuable space being reserved for loading areas that may not be used that often and could otherwise be utilized by the use for things like dwelling units, commercial space, or other amenities. To address these issues, the following changes are proposed. Amendments to 21A 44060 to modify standards for driveway widths and distinguish driveway and drive approach standards and establish vehicle staging standards for garage doors. Amendments to 21A 44070 to remove loading area requirement and rename loading area to loading facility. Adding language to 21A 62040 to define driveway and drive approach, as well as other related sections of 21A will be amended as part of this proposal. The proposal details. To address issues identified with driveways, the proposal removes the standards of maximum width to all driveways combined and would apply to each individually. As demonstrated by this image, the example on top shows how the current code would apply to a corner lot in the M1 zone. While this lot has a total of 600 feet of street frontage, only 2 driveways with a maximum combined width of 50 feet would be permitted. So essentially you could have like 2 25-foot driveways. This limits access for large lots with uses that need to accommodate large vehicles. The bottom example shows how the proposal applies to each individual driveway. The proposal also makes changes to the number of driveways that are permitted by allowing one additional curb cut for every 250 feet of street frontage after the initial 100. So with the proposal, this lot would potentially be able to have 3 30-foot wide driveways. These changes allow flexibility to better accommodate the access needs while also ensuring conflicts between different modes of transportation is minimized by having regulations that consider different uses and lot sizes. The proposal also renames access to drive approach and defines that term. This will create clarification on what a drive approach is and where that is located. By making this clarification, we were also able to resolve the issue of how the driveway width standards apply to the zones that do not have required front or corner side yards. This proposal will also change the width standards in Table 21A 44060C to apply to the drive approaches rather than driveways, since the definition of a drive approach means it has to be in the right of way. The width of the driveway will also still be regulated, as the proposal includes a standard that the width of the driveway must match the width of the drive approach. And additionally, we will be defining drive approach and driveway, so that way the language in the code will be updated to utilize both those terms, and each standard will apply to each of those terms separately. The proposal also adds language to address vehicle staging for driveways that access garage doors. that are similar to how we have vehicle staging for gates. Garage doors have a similar impact to vehicle staging as gates do, and so including staging standards for them eliminates any traffic congestion that could be created. To address issues with loading, the proposal is removing the requirement for off-street loading areas. Staff has found that for some uses, there's just not enough of demand for a loading area to justify taking up the valuable space that is required to accommodate one. If a use determines that the need for a loading area, that there is a need for a loading area to be able to carry out their use, then they can provide one, and these standards will still remain if use chooses to provide one. And this example here is an example of a multifamily development on 45 North Chicago Street, where under the current code, they were required to provide a loading area. And as you can see, it's because there's a 14-foot vertical clearance standard for loading areas, which is taller than the average ground floor. It's eating into an area that could be used for an initial dwelling unit, as well as an amenity space or a commercial space. Additionally, the proposal is renaming loading area to loading facilities. Throughout the code, there are multiple terms used to reference a loading facility, such as berth, dock, and area. And to create clarity and consistency, we are using this umbrella term of loading facility and applying the standard, and all the standards that apply to loading areas, berth, or dock will now be loading facility. The public process for this project included sending the 45-day notice to the recognized community organizations, posting an online open house, and posting notice of the public hearing. We have received one comment in support of this amendment during the 45-day period, and that has been included in the staff report. To conclude, based on the information discussed and in the staff report, staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I do have a question. I'm sorry, Madison. Maybe you said it. What is the requirement for a loading dock in a residential space now?
So the requirement is for, if you have a multifamily use, it's going to be
how many units?
80 or more units.
80 or more units. And you're recommending no requirement?
Correct.
So if I have 400 units and somebody moves in every single day, there's a van outside parked on the street every day?
So there would no longer be a requirement, but if the use decided that they wanted to provide one,
who
they
decides?
could. If
the applicant?
Yeah, the applicant.
Not so much. Yeah, not so much. I think sometimes people say, oh, I don't have to do a loading area when they have constant in and out loading. And I think that we need maybe 80 is not the right number. Maybe 80 is way too low. But there are places literally where people are moving in every single day and moving out every single day, and they have to be scheduled with the people to have the loading dock. So we think, okay, I moved once in the last 3 years, so that's what we think happens, but that is not what happens. What happens is there's a lot of people moving in and out all the time, and for larger buildings, I don't know what the answer is, but it's not up to the applicant.
I guess a question I have is as it's written, it doesn't guarantee that.
Do we want to make sure we hold that public hearing? I know there's
I'm sorry.
nobody really
Yes,
here,
of
but
course.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. Yeah, if anyone would like to give comment, go ahead and approach the microphone. Let's go ahead and close the public hearing. Well, have we received any emails on this? No. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
I remember on a previous project we saw, there has to be a place for, if you have a garbage that needs to be picked up by a big truck, there has to be a place for the truck to pick it up off of the street, so they're not blocking the street when they're picking up your garbage once a week. that this change doesn't affect that, but you still would have the same problem where, like, yeah, some of the companies and maybe if you require a loading dock before, unless you're a multifamily, you still would. It would be a different measurement, kind of. Is that what you're saying?
So what's this doing is it's removing the requirement for having a loading dock, a loading area. That table that's in 21A 44070, that's removed. But the standards that apply to those loading areas will still remain.
You're just removing it from the residential or the multifamily?
No,
chapter?
it's for all uses.
That seems like too much. Isn't there a lot of loading and unloading happening in our city?
So the thought is that if a use would require loading to be able to effectively carry out that use, they would then provide one because it's in their best interest to do so. So that decision should be on the property owner rather than the city.
Are we just making a recommendation to the city council? Okay, it seems like then we're moving something that we've required for businesses to put in at their expense, and now all of a sudden they're just going to use our public right-of-way to do that instead? Like, that doesn't... The fact that the only comment we have in favor of this is from a developer tells me a lot about who this is great for.
One thing I would point out, this kind of goes back to our design standard conversation. It's been difficult for people to meet their required ground floor usage as well. And so I think especially for smaller buildings, it's very difficult to do that. So just something to consider.
Fine, they can count their loading dock as a public active use.
I think we need a little bit more research on what a large building really requires. I mean, there are architectural standards about this. So that say, if you have X amount of units, you need an off-street. And we should just use those standards. I mean, we shouldn't just make it up. So I would like to table this and bring it back when we have loading standards that we can agree with, because I think we need loading standards.
I just want to jump in. Living in a neighborhood that has a lot of different housing types, the larger ones like Irving Heights must have a loading area, because I don't really ever see vans for them. But my gosh, the one across the street, whatever its name is, and down the street on 12th, there's loading vans all the time. And they do block it up for a while. So it's doable for what's there, but if all of them didn't have a loading area along the 12th East near my house, that would be a problem. Because there's so many of them, there's a lot of activity for that. So I'm assuming, because Irving Heights is fairly large, they must have a loading area somewhere that doesn't spill out on the street. But yeah, there's moving vans all the time up and down 12th. So I think the idea that there may be a threshold where it's above 80, because right now it's doable, but I would say if all of the apartment multifamily that is along that street near my house were using the street, then we would have some real problems. If what is that threshold? That kind of makes a little more sense, because I think it does fall onto the city a little bit to try to make sure we're not creating where the right of way becomes completely blocked. And there are times where we can't get two cars past. We have to hang out and wait, and if it's backed up at the street because nobody can turn because of construction, we can't move. So it's tough. And I agree that maybe we do need to look at that a little bit better. Just throwing out the impact that I deal with in my neighborhood related to that. I think it's appropriate to maybe look at a better threshold than nothing at all.
For just the benefit of staff, do you guys have any issues with the other portion of this request with the driveway widths or the number of drive approaches?
I did not.
Okay.
Will that have the effect of increasing the number of
curb cuts,
like crossings of vehicles across the sidewalk?
Yeah, I mean,
The curb
it would
cuts?
allow for more of them, so it would. It's just as we're finding as we're implementing it, we set that number really, really low, especially for manufacturing uses and industrial uses where they can't get a truck in because it's too small. So it can also create the same thing. We're creating more congestion because we have fewer ways to get in. I mean, we want to make sure there's a balance, which is why in the residential neighborhoods, we're not adding more of them. This is mainly to help solve problems in industrial areas.
I think the width of that lot was really geared towards industrial. When I saw that, I was like, that's who's having this problem. So increased curb cuts, I don't think we would see so much in other areas where it would be a concern because of was it 600 feet, I think?
Yeah, so the amendment, the proposal is to allow one additional curb cut for every additional 250 feet of street frontage on top of the initial first 100 feet. So basically, to have two curb cuts, you'd have to have 350 feet.
Yeah, I think I felt like that was very geared towards industrial areas, so that makes some sense to me. I don't want additional curb cuts elsewhere, but that's fine.
Didn't we already outlaw long buildings earlier today?
Just tonight.
I feel like I feel like maybe we should table this to reconsider that it just going away, the requirement going away in all cases, in all uses, because I think that if you can turn a company expense into let's make the public pay for that, we'll just use the road instead, it would happen, and that would be detrimental to the public.
I agree that you can't leave this up to the discretion of individual developers. There's got to be some requirements around it.
Any others? You want to say something?
Yeah, one other thing is just one possible solution to this, so the second part of it is about loading areas being required to be fully publicly screened, and so I imagine that that's what's pulling them into structured parking lots. It might make sense to keep the loading requirement, but just get rid of the requirement for public screening, because then they can just have a 50 by 30 spot on the side of the building where trucks could pull in. So that's the thought.
But if you do that, show us what it would look like. There's a reason why they're screened. So if it's not a great reason, we can get over it.
We do allow that. Your loading system doesn't have to be inside your building necessarily. It's just that most of these developers want to fully utilize all their property, and so they want to bring it into the parking garage. So.
There's public
But we
screening
can bring-
required, isn't there?
It's a requirement. Yeah,
Some
it's a
places?
requirement.
Yeah.
That's kind of how this whole amendment started with the loading. It was because of some of these standards. We were seeing some issues with design for these residential buildings, having to have these required loading areas. So it was taking away space that could be used for ground floor uses, especially because the 14-foot vertical clearance. It was taking away space that could be used for a dwelling unit on the second floor, things like that. So it started because of the design issue, and it just kind of developed into just removing the loading requirement.
Okay, swing it back the other way, maybe. Yeah. Can I make a motion?
Okay, please.
Oh, okay. Let me find one. I move that the Planning Commission table this item to a later date to be determined by staff. The public hearing should be left open.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Burrows and a second from Commissioner Scheer. Any discussion to the motion?
I do. Do staff feel like you need it spelled out in the motion, or do you feel like you have enough direction of the things we talked about?
I don't know. I think you can. I got some notes down, so it's probably good.
Sometimes I just wanted to clarify if the motion needed to be more articulate in that regard. But if you feel like it's appropriate, then that's good.
Okay, let's take a vote. Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. That application is tabled. And since we have run out of items, we will go ahead and adjourn. Good job, everyone.